Hello, everybody. It's Dyer here, otherwise known as Rob, as you can all see, and this is our NES Roundtable, in which we are meeting to discuss the NES and etc., so on and so forth. So, I've got a good group of people with me tonight, so just to go ahead and get them all introduced. First, we have Eugene.
Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
And we also have Jim.
Hi, guys. How's it going?
And we've got my longtime collaborator, Mike.
Last and definitely least, I am here for some reason.
You're here because you are here. There. That's a good reason.
Why are we here? Because we're here to roll the bones.
Exactly.
And then Getty goes into a rat break.
Let's not discuss that. Anyway.
Yes, let's not.
So, as I stated originally, we're here to talk about all things NES, up to and including the Famicom. So...
Sorry, I can't stop looking at Jim's icon.
Exploding Hitler head.
Technically, that's not Hitler, so...
Oh, you mean
PG-13.
Master D?
Yeah, Master D.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, that scared me a lot as a kid, even if it was the awesomest thing ever.
I remember seeing my friend Brawley complete that for the first time, and it's like, holy crap, I can't believe they actually pulled that off.
Yep. Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, it is my conspiracy theory that the censorship team never made it that far in the game, so I didn't even know that existed.
Yeah.
Someone really should ask Howard Phillips one day in like an interview. Like, did you actually see this?
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't be surprised if they gave up at Area 6. That one's a huge spike.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of
huge spiked balls in it, so yeah.
There are a lot of eyebrows raising moments in NES games. Like, did you? How far in Golgo 13 did you play, Howard? Like,
Oh boy.
That game is not as good as I remember it. When I streamed before I went on hiatus, that was like one of the last games I played, and it kind of sucks. I hate to say.
oh man, we should. That's not a question that we had planned to discuss, but we should loop back around to that one. Like the fog of nostalgia, like games that you loved as a kid that you revisit it now and you're like, wait a minute, this is actually really terrible.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm kind of jumping the gun here. I'm just.
Oh no worries. This is.
It's all right, Mike.
Yes.
Anyway, before we kick things off, I just want to go ahead and say, hey, who's in the chat right now? I see Great White North. I see Bill85 Gamer. How you doing, guys? And also, the NES Roundtable image you're seeing on screen right now was put together by Bette. So.
Oh, Bette.
Yep.
Hey, everybody.
She is here, but she is doing her own thing right now, so. After all, NES is not exactly high on her list of things to talk about.
You know, come to think of it, you don't really play many NES games in your videos.
Yeah, I haven't really gotten to that point yet. I've been trying to spread things around, just all over the place. So
I have to say that I think that there's like a lack of NES content on YouTube of all things. I think I like that you're featuring games that I've never heard of, especially some of the, Genesis platforms and things that we will not be discussing tonight.
Right.
But those are things that I didn't really have an opportunity to explore as a kid.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It seems like you tackle some of the more weird, obscure titles from different systems.
That's been my bread and butter for years.
Yeah, I really liked Honey and the Road in particular. It reminded me I needed to play that one. But there's in the TG16 roundtable, although I would like to have one of those later. But
it could be in the cards.
Cool.
Anyway, the way I figure it, we'll go ahead and just go around the table, starting with Eugene with every question. We'll loop back to me and then go to the next one. If that sounds good to you guys.
What?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of this. I was depending on hearing other people's responses to things. Some of these.
We can always start with Jim.
No, no,
I say
no.
we
It's
mix it
fine
up a
starting
little
with
bit.
Eugene.
Oh man!
You
All
can
right.
start with Wii and go counterclockwise.
Yeah, we can start with Mike.
Hey Spoot, how's it going?
Oh, Spoot's here?
Hey, Spoot.
Yeah.
Nice.
Spoon.
How's it going?
Yo.
All right. So, also, but before we really kick things off, just to let everyone know who heard about my dog, he has made a complete recovery, and
great.
he's
Awesome.
jumping around. He's got a nice scar now, but it kind of just makes him look tough, you know?
Yeah.
He earned it.
Yeah. I myself am doing better after what happened to me last time.
That's
That wasn't fun. Never is.
No.
Of course, it helps I don't remember anything when it happens.
good.
All right, so let's see. Mike,
Yes.
let's start with our first question with you.
Yo.
What was your first time playing the NES?
First time that I remember, and I only know this because it was caught on home video, and I have no idea where those tapes are nowadays, if they even exist, but I was approximately 2 years old, with footage of me playing not a game anyone would expect to be anyone's first game, but it was Low G Man by Taxman and Kid, which I have an ungodly amount of nostalgia for that game, even if it isn't great, and I know Rob's not really a fan of Kid, but it's got its charms. It looks weird, has a distinctive visual about it. It's got a pretty good soundtrack. Pretty creepy final level, although I never really reached it as a kid, but I got there eventually. I don't remember this. Anything before age 4 for me is a total blank, but that had video documentation technically leads me to this answer, which may be a bit of a cheat, but that's the best I can give you.
Hey, you know, it works.
Yes.
Forgetting Low G Man might have been for the best. You might not be a big NES fan today if that had been if you remembered that being your first game.
Yeah. I mean, I have more inherent memories of Castlevania 2 and 3. Although somehow I didn't start out with the first game until I was like 10 years old, but maybe that's something we can get to later. I don't know.
I can tell you the most I remember about Low G Man is that opening. And it's like, it was a peaceful planet until they came. We'll send in Low G Man.
Yeah, it's a cool opening.
I remember the weird, like the cartoon dude, right? Like the guy who looks like he's on some kind of game show.
Yeah.
Yeah, he definitely has a 90s Sentai hero-esque design about him. I actually had my friend Song draw a fan art of him that I am quite proud of. It looks really neat.
Oh, nice. Hey, it's Mr. Matthews.
Yo.
Hey, Mr. Matthews.
Nice.
It's a shame you don't have those. It's a shame you don't have those tapes anymore, Mike, because you could create a whole YouTube channel around sharing those online.
That would be a really cool idea, but I can't guarantee that there were any others that showed me playing video games, so I'm not sure how far I could run with it.
Yeah, I wish I had more documentation of me playing video games and especially NES as a kid. I'm trying to take lots of pictures and videos of my son. Like when he finished his first game, I made sure that I got some video that. Things like that, but because I don't have a big trail of like information about stuff that I was doing as a kid.
Oh, no worries. The ether of time swallows all, but that's a grim sentiment.
That's a cheerful thought.
Yeah, right.
I've been Mr. Sunshine lately. It is what it is.
Yeah. Well, how about you, Jim? What was your first time playing the NES?
My first time, I think I had to have only been like 4 or 5, and I had this vague memory of going to some cousin's house, and they had an NES setup, and my first game's not going to be anything near as exciting as Low G Man, but it was Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt is the combo cartridge, and I remember watching my cousins play, and then at one point they passed me the controller, and it's probably about the most pathetic showing of Super Mario Brothers you would ever see, because it was literally me, looking at the screen, looking at the controller, pressing a button, looking up at the screen to see, what that did. And it was just like jumping up and down and getting killed by the very first Goomba a couple times before I finally figured out what was going on. But I have to say, I was hooked. I must have, raved about the experience to my parents, because that Christmas I ended up getting the NES action set with Mario Duck Hunt and the Zapper for Christmas that year.
Nice.
Yeah.
And no, go ahead.
I have a theory that everyone dies to the first Goomba at some point in their life. I think I actually put it into my high school, my college senior thesis, which was a Marxist examination of Super Mario Brothers somehow. But I'm not kidding; it actually went over pretty well.
I mean, people who study game design, like, they point to the first stage of Mario Brothers as Super Mario Brothers as like as an example of how to teach someone to play a game, because naturally someone will run towards that Goomba, and then the next time they play it, they'll try to jump over the Goomba, and they'll probably hit a block, and then they're like, oh, I can hit blocks, So there's like a really interesting way that they just kind of like teach you incrementally, like how you're supposed to interact with the environment and like what to expect. If you haven't read the manual, of course. Like if you read the manual, like you go in with some expectations, you probably still die to the Goomba, just because, like, I sometimes still die to that Goomba just because, you readjust to the controls, or you just misjudge it because it's been a while or whatever, and you just completely like botch it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is intuitive as a tutorial level, and it only takes a minute or two, unlike how tutorials became so bloated in the 21st century. But I'm not going to do too much crapping on modern gaming if I can help it, even though Dyer would probably relish it. But...
Well,
But no, I completely agree with, like, I miss kind of that organic teaching of a game that you had back in that era where they didn't have, the hand-holding tutorials.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
And not every game is as well designed as Super Mario Brothers.
Right.
This
right.
is true.
Unfortunately.
Low G Man sure wasn't.
Like famously for me, the first time I played Darkman, probably in college, like I kept running off the screen. Like I never cleared the first screen of the game, because I did not know what I was doing, and he just kept going off the edge into a pit, and I was just like, this game is terrible. I don't know what to do.
That game controls like beached ice. I don't know how better to put it. It's terrible.
Beached ice?
Yeah, I mixed a metaphor too there. I don't know.
So there's a Tengism.
Yeah, let's go with that.
Well, how about you, Eugene? What was yours?
Yeah, so I actually recently was trying. I have a terrible memory, especially like I kept trying to think, like, how old was I actually when I got the NES? Thinking back, the first time I played Nintendo, the NES was probably when I got one for myself. I don't recall playing it at a friend's place or anything like that, or any like cousins or anything like that. So it would have been Christmas '89 when I got my NES action set with the orange zapper. Which is how I'm pretty sure that it was 1989, and it probably would have been Super Mario Brothers. I'm pretty sure that's the first one because I remember reading the manual while my mom and her boyfriend were connecting it to the TV, and I was just like looking through the manual, like getting more and more excited to play it, and which was one of my favorite things about manuals back in the day. Like, you would get a new game, and sometimes you wouldn't be able to play the game right away. Like, you'd be in the car or whatever, or I would bring the manual to school with me and like look at it, because I want to be playing the game. So yeah, Super Mario Brothers, and then like shortly after that, it would have been Duck Hunt. Like before the NES, like the first game I remember playing at a friend's place was probably like Millipede, I think, on the Atari 2600. And I would have only known about the NES from probably TV ads and my like kids at school who all had Nintendos, and
Yeah, I gotta say, Mike, you're definitely the odd man out here because mine too was Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always the odd man in anything, so I accept it with pride and dignity. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with SMB being your first. That would, in fact, that's why you guys turned out normally. That's why I'm still a lonely 30-something bum arse PA up here.
Well, unless you have anything you want to add, Eugene, I'll go ahead and tell my story.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, it's funny that there was stuff mentioned here because, and this will sound familiar, anyone that's read Memoirs of a Virtual Caveman, but the first time I played the NES, I did not do so willingly. I was very much, at the time, it was about 87 or so, I was a die-hard Atari fanboy. Back before I knew what fanboy was, or even that term being coined, I have no idea. But a friend of mine at the time, his uncle had just had brought over the original NES action set with the gray zapper and the Mario Duck Hunt cart. And I'd heard about this thing from the kids in school. They're all going, how great it is. And I'm like, it's all graphics. There's no gameplay. It's, and hey, my 7800 can play 2600 games. Can your Nintendo, your precious Nintendo, do that? I don't think so. So I was kind of hostile towards it. So they hooked it up out in the family room, and of course they're having a great time. I'm just sitting in their kitchen, just like, stupid Nintendo thing. And then I realized I'm the only one in there, and it's like, fine, I'll go out there and join, but I'm not going to look at the screen. So I sit there, and I'm avoiding it, And eventually, I kind of started looking at it, and it's like, that looks like Mario from Donkey Kong. Okay. And finally, my friend's like, you want to try it? I'm like, no. So they passed along to the next person. They asked me again. No. And then finally, I start looking at it. I'm watching them play, and it's like, here's a little voice inside my head. It kind of looks like fun. So I got handed the controller, and the next time they asked, and I ran right into the first Goomba.
There you go. There
Yep.
Everyone does it.
Yep, and after playing that for a while, we switched over to Duck Hunt, and was all downhill from there.
Hooray.
So, which I know there had been a couple of places that started renting out NES games at the time. It was established enough where places were starting to rent them, but it wasn't like widespread yet. So that leads me right into the next one. Did you ever rent games, Mike?
Games, I actually don't believe so. I don't want to sound like I'm rubbing it in everyone's faces, but I am a few years younger than you gents. And by the time I knew what a rental was, it was the SNES that was primarily on rental shelves. And then the N64 and PS1, that's where I mostly remember putting my rentals towards. But there was a rental shop in our nearby town, a little place called Corner Video, where to make room for the SNES and Genesis games, their NES stock was actually sold off at very cheap prices, and that's actually how my brother formed a large bulk of our NES collection, which was a really sweet deal, to say the least. It was a bit of a grab bag, but for the most part, we had quality titles. I mean, that is where I got Castlevania 2 and 3, but not 1, and Contra from, for starters. Yeah, we probably had Super Mario Brothers and so on and so forth. What else? That'd take too long to ruminate on. I don't want to hold the baton for too long. But long story short, no, but I got a good deal from a rental store out of it, so that's rad.
That kind of counts. How about you, Jim?
Yeah.
Yeah, renting was actually my primary way of playing the NES growing up. My parents, were somewhat against the idea of buying me games for NES outside of rare occasions, but oftentimes we would go to our local video store. Encore Video was its name, and the parents would pick out a movie to watch, and I would be able to rent a game for the weekend. So honestly, I think outside of that Mario Duck Hunt cartridge that I got with my NES, ice hockey is the only other game that I actually owned, um, into my adult life.
Oh my god.
For the NES. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
But I don't begrudge that though, because renting, I was exposed to a lot of different NES games, and I definitely had my favorites that I was able to rent from the store. And I mean, I was able to borrow games from friends and that too, but yeah, I really didn't start like picking up and owning games until like Super Nintendo and Game Boy, more out of necessity because there was no place to rent out Game Boy games. But so yeah, I mean, renting was definitely a big part of my childhood.
Nice. How about you, Eugene?
Rad.
I have never rented a video game.
Wow.
When I was a kid, I mean, money was tight. Like me getting an NES in the first place was nothing short of a miracle. Let alone like a game, every so often. I could count on one hand probably the number of times we ever even just rented like movies. It just wasn't something that we did very much. And so I missed out entirely on that whole kind of experience. And weirdly, like early on, my mom was very strict. So when I was much younger, like I didn't really go over to friends' houses that often, and they didn't come over to our house. So that's why I didn't get to play NES there. And she was against me like borrowing games from people, and certainly not lending games out, because if something happened to the game, she reasoned like it would be a disaster, right? If we had to replace it or something like that. So early on, I wasn't allowed to borrow games from friends, but I did occasionally borrow a game or two. I remember playing Wizards and Warriors, but I played Wizards and Warriors for like an hour early in the morning on like a Saturday morning before she got up. And then if I heard her coming, I had to like quickly like turn off the Nintendo. And this is why, like as a kid, I never got very far in Wizards and Warriors. Also because I didn't have the manual, I had no idea what I was doing. But at some point, I remember she must have warmed to the idea, maybe with some friends that she like trusted of mine, because I definitely remember borrowing games and playing them with her watching me. And I borrowed like Bionic Commando as a kid and didn't get very far. I think I got to the sewer level where the water is like pulling you out of the level. Yeah, but I didn't understand what was happening because again I didn't have the manual. So I was haunted by this level where I thought blob creatures were coming out of the walls and like dragging me away. Right, that was the way that I interpreted that level. So yeah, I didn't borrow a lot of games and then later on I started buying, like my friends would sell their games for like really stupidly cheap because they just needed money. And they didn't have to pay money to buy them in the first place. So I got a lot of games that way, and I bought a lot of like used games from our local shop, which is how I managed to play more games than just the expensive ones I got for Christmas and birthdays.
Hey, borrowing is equally as valid, I think. As far as me, my parents thought video stores were a godsend. But we didn't go to the movies or anything like that, so from the minute we got our first VCR, we were hitting up the local rental places. And you couldn't rent Atari games, at least where I lived. So renting wasn't a thing until the NES. And I distinctly remember at my friend's house, we got that first NES. They'd actually had a couple of games they'd rented as well. I think, if I remember correctly, they were Track and Field and or maybe Track and Field 2, I don't know exactly, and Freedom Force.
Oh boy,
That game just screams 80s.
that was some weekend, huh?
That was.
Very kid friendly.
Yeah. Shoot the terrorists with max power and whatever his name is. But
Hitman. That was Narc. Never mind.
yeah, my brother and I actually had to get our NES. We had to basically beg for it because there'd been a fight with another friend of ours who had an NES. So I was bringing it over to our house. Him and my brother got into a fight and it was banned from the house. But we moved to Florida at one point from Connecticut. And somehow, Ryan and I managed to talk our parents into buying us our own NES. So, first thing we did after that trip, once we started packing up, was to go down to the local video store and rent some games. See, I remember we rented Skate or Die, we rented Legendary Wings, and the Goonies too. And then,
Good stuff.
yeah, and once
Nice.
we got down to Florida, there was a local place called Video Plus, which they had a wall of NES games to rent like you wouldn't believe. So I became a regular there. In fact, kind of funny story about that. The week Super C came out, they had exactly 2 copies. I went in, saw it on the shelf, freaked out because I love Contra, and I remember they only had one of them. So I rented that. I went to call up my friend Bromley, let him know I'd rented Super C. I guess we rented the other copy. So somehow the two of us managed to each get Super C. So, but
Looks like we're getting some buffering. I don't know.
Yeah, I think so too.
Hang on, am
Yeah.
I still here?
I can hear him.
You're still here.
Yeah.
I hear you.
The Discord had a little bit of a fart. I was worried I got
Yeah,
disconnected.
it must be an internet issue.
Yeah.
It seems okay, but the picture quality just went like. Hold on, let me see.
These
That's
things
my-
happen. $8.
Yeah, that's fine. I think it was probably just a temporary hiccup.
Yeah, it should straighten itself out. But anyway, if you were able to hear my story there, hopefully you were.
I was, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on then. Now, you figure we're going to ask the basic questions like, what's your favorite NES game and all that. But no, I'm going to ask what your least favorite NES game is. Mike?
There are certainly several picks I could put here. Time Associates Dick Tracy game around much longer than I should have. That game is pants. Royal pants. It's like you're going to hear the same damn music for every single stage. You will get blasted to all hell by snipers on the roof with ungodly accuracy. You have like no checkpoints in any of the game's 5 stages. It has maybe a little bit of an ambitious premise, like it's, I guess you could say, a really, really distant precursor to the early Grand Theft Auto games, what with the overhead vehicle map and whatnot, but the game's just really repetitive and real BS to play. I somehow, like, many years later, I somehow hung in there long enough to beat the first mission, and that, I think, is a personal point of accomplishment, which makes me feel I don't have to play the game anymore. And I never did, so there.
Now, just as an aside, my internet's going a little screwy over here. So,
Nerds.
OBS dropped out for a second, then came right back on. I hope there was no interruption that anyone noticed.
I just saw a bit of buffering, but nothing major.
Okay. I was busy looking into it, so I actually missed the game that Mike was talking about, at least the title.
It was the NES Dick Tracy game.
I should have known from the snipers.
Yeah.
Released close around the same time that the movie was, if I'm not mistaken, and Big Boy Caprice does certainly resemble Al Pacino in the interstitials in between each missions, but really, I think the link to the property in question is tenuous. Except for everyone's famous mugshots, because Dick Tracy is famous for having all of its gruesome, physically bizarre villains. I'm not really sure what would have made it a Dick Tracy game, just because of how ultimately generic it is. So, it could have been called Crime Man for all I know, and it wouldn't really have been any different. So,
Yeah, whenever
it's maybe far from the worst licensed junk on the NES, but it's one I kind of have a personal bugbear with. So it is what it is.
whenever I think of Dick Tracy, I think of that watch he's got. So
Yep. I think that watch. I think it's somewhere in the game. I don't remember. There's one thing I liked about the game, though. Whenever you fail to enter a password, it's framed as like cracking open a safe, and if you enter a wrong password, the safe opens and it just explodes, and it just has fire in it, which is actually pretty funny. I got to admit, but that's really the only thing I like about that game.
That doesn't sound safe at all.
Right.
Good point. Very good point.
I don't think I've ever actually seen the movie, the Dick Tracy movie. I used to watch the cartoon though, so that's where I get all. That's
I never
all
saw
my
the
knowledge
movie
of
either.
What was the cartoon? Was that the one with Joe Jitsu in it?
I don't remember. Then I feel like I should.
It was racist. There may have been another animated series though, but sorry, Jim. I think I talked over you.
No, you're fine. I know I saw Dick Tracy. I think I saw it in the local theater as a kid, but I remember next to nothing about it except for the watch that was mentioned. I thought it was pretty cool. But I remember being like a fan of it as a kid, but like I said, nothing stuck with me to even remember much about it today.
Yeah, I did see the movie also, not when it was out, several years later, and it's okay. Honestly, Warren Beatty is just alright in it. I don't think Tracy is much of a hero that really moves the plot. Really, he just kind of gets by in Deus Ex Machinas and all. Really, I think Al Pacino stole the show, as unsurprisingly he did. It was also an attempted vehicle to try and sell Madonna as an actor, which... No siree, I don't think so. But that's not the NES, so we should probably move on. I'm sorry.
I'll just say they were trying to get their cut of that Batman money from the year before.
Oh, no kidding. Yeah, no, it was totally aping from Burton's Batman, which it certainly wasn't the only film to do so, I think. And, that was a huge hit, which...
Yeah.
But the NES game based on that movie was much, much better, as we all know.
So how about you, Jim? Least favorite game?
Least favorite game? I actually find that I'm pretty forgiving of most of the NES library, but one game that I remember renting as a kid and being disappointed with it, even at that time, is Where's Waldo?
No! Oh, that one's really bad.
So yeah, I rented that for the weekend and finished the game in 5-10 minutes or something like that, and there's not much to go back to. I mean, the graphics are poor even by NES standards. Waldo is barely recognizable as Waldo, and like I said, the whole game can be beaten extremely quickly, so it was just kind of a waste of a rental and not much of a game either.
No surprise there.
I'm never gonna let Bethesda, no matter how freaking famous they are, for all that Elder Scrolls money or whatever, I'm never gonna let them forget that they made that stupid game.
I guess I didn't even realize that was Bethesda.
It was, yeah.
Wow.
Crazy. I mean, hey, Atlas got their start making Friday the 13th or whatever. And I think the Jaws game before they hit their big money with SMT, but At least, Jim, you only rented it. If you purchased it, that would have been all sorts of terrible.
Oh,
God.
definitely. Yeah, yeah. I feel bad for any kid who got that for a birthday or Christmas present, or
Yeah.
that once a year NES game if it ended up being that one.
I'm pretty sure that was one of the junk games we got that my brother sold back ASAP, so... I remember it somehow, but it's just a total miss on all fronts.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Matthews brings up Mickey Mouse Capade, the worst game he ever played.
That's also a crappy one.
And that's,
Hudson
not that-
Prime.
It's not
Why
that
not?
bad.
yeah, it's actually, especially in comparison to those couple of games. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is
I
more
think that
quality, but-
yeah. I think as the from the childhood perspective, it's the expectation, right? It's every rental, every purchase, every game you get is like you don't know a lot about it except for maybe you've heard about it in Nintendo Power or maybe somebody's talked about it, but otherwise you're just going off of the title or the art or the box or whatever.
Art, yeah.
And every game is a promise, it's hope, and then you bring it home and you find out what it actually is, and your disappointment, especially when that's money that's gone or that's time that's gone.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to come back to that thread, Eugene, but what's yours?
So I think like Jim, I am probably more forgiving of the NES library than I should be. I tend to be able to find something in a game that I enjoy or that's interesting, or I can kind of look at the game for what it's trying to do, whether or not it succeeds. Initially, I was going to say Bigfoot because
that's my brother's most hated game.
oh my god, I've streamed like more than 300 NES games at this point for my collection, and Bigfoot I think was the first one that I played that I just was really miserable, and it's all captured on stream. Like it was just the controls are really bad, the games are not fun. It's just not a good game. But I think the game that probably lives larger in my memory is Ultimate Exodus.
Okay.
So I'd mentioned before, like we were able to buy like cheap used games from a local shop when I was a kid, and one of those games I picked up was Ultimate Exodus, and I brought it home, and I didn't have the manual for it, so right off the bat, especially with Ultimate Exodus, you're out of luck. And I
That's
put
gonna be
it in.
painful.
Oh, Ultima. I thought you said
Ultima.
Ultimate.
No,
no,
Ultima Exodus, and even by NES standards, that is an ugly game.
Mm-hmm.
It's very primitive. It's very unintuitive. I didn't know what to do, and I probably struggled with it for a little while, and we ended up going back to see if they would let us exchange it. And happily, they did allow us to exchange it. And instead, I came home with Legacy of the Wizard, which is also a very difficult game, but is a little bit easier to understand. And I did have the manual for that one. And that game, I just was very happy to wander around in for months and months. And I actually did end up finishing that game as a kid with very, very minimal assistance. But I do still have a letter from a game counselor that I had written to for help. But yeah, so Ultimate Exodus, and I've tried to revisit it. I sort of want to revisit it as an adult, where I have maybe more patience and more capacity to understand how to actually play the game.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely been, I hated it so much, I sent it back.
Actually, Gene, I can't relate to that. I honestly don't know what the general consensus is on the quality of that port, because, of course, it's a port of Richard Garriott's Ultima 3, which the Ultima series is apparently quite well respected on its original computer origins, but I don't know how good the port in question was. But I totally understand about not comprehending a more complicated game, especially of the RPG mold. Because another game that my brother got from Corner Video was the original Final Fantasy. And when we were kids, we could not figure out how to beat Garland, who was the first boss in the game. And we had no idea what we were doing, so we just sold it back then. I feel like kind of an idiot doing that, but can't blame me, can ya?
Yeah, I can see that's one of my favorite NES games.
I love
back
it
from being
now,
a kid.
yeah.
So yeah.
It's just probably not a great choice for a child's first game. Yeah,
I can see that.
I didn't understand the concept of delayed gratification in the form of leveling up. So
You were supposed to buy the Nintendo Power strategy guide for Final Fantasy.
I had that actually, but I don't know if we had it before or after the game was sold. So, but I thought it looked cool at least. So
Yeah. Speaking of Final Fantasy One, I know the first time I played it, I didn't understand that when you bought equipment, you actually had to equip it.
yeah,
Yep.
everyone made that mistake at some point.
So yeah, that definitely made Garland much harder than he should have been.
Yeah.
He knocked you all down, didn't he?
Oh yeah.
He sure did.
I actually have a bit of a honorable, dishonorable mention, if you'll allow it, Rob.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, it's gonna playing off of the same idea as RPGs. Another game that I had considered for my least favorite was the original Wizardry, Proving Grounds of the Mad Wizard.
Ah,
Oh, yeah. That
And I don't think that it's a bad game. And actually, I've been tempted to, pick it up as an adult and kind of look at it again. But for one thing, I don't care for like the 3D mazes in some dungeon crawlers like that had. And as a kid, it was just like so much text, so much just numbers and statistics that that was another rental that was just not a good experience. Definitely not really much of a kid's game.
Not in the slightest. Well, yeah, speaking of Final Fantasy, there was a time once I did play RPGs every so often. And by the time I got around to playing the original Final Fantasy, I'd already played 2 on the Super NES. And that kind of spoiled me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I could understand that, definitely.
Yeah. But as far as my own least favorite NES game, I had a bunch of bad experience with rentals. Mainly stuff my brother rented. Stuff like Fox's Peter Pan and the Pirates.
Oh,
never played that one. At least I don't think I have, but don't imagine that's any good.
And
I think that's one of my wife's least favorite games. She bought that game as a kid and then returned it and got Super Mario Brothers 3 instead, I think.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's an upgrade.
it is an upgrade.
Oh, also, Eugene and Jim, I appreciate you guys shouting me out in the chat, but that might be a little gratuitous, so thank you.
yes, the Mike you're talking to is, in fact, Michael Plaskett.
Hello.
Oh, that's weird.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay, I see what you're saying now. Okay.
Yeah, I would be Satanga in the chat if I could, but I don't know how to change my name, and YouTube is arbitrary full of its crap, so
Yeah.
it is what it is.
Well, let's see, though. Another one was Muppet Adventure Chaos at the Carnival.
Ooh.
Oh,
There was The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Oh, wow. That is the worst. Oh, boy.
And I genuinely hate those games. But
Yeah.
I'd have to say for my money, because it literally was my money, the first and last time I bought something based on a license alone, it was sometime in, I don't know, mid-90. Got a good report card or something. My parents had said to Ryan and I, we're going to get you each a new Nintendo game. So we go to Toys R Us. Ryan finds a game he wants, which is The Adventures of Dino Ricky.
Not my favorite.
Not mine either, but still better than the game I picked.
Oh.
Well, first I was looking for Simon's Quest. Didn't have it. Looking for Life Force.
Aw.
Didn't have it.
Oh.
And then I saw
Man, both of those classics.
But then I saw a game, which I'm thinking it's got to be good. It's based on one of my favorite movies of all time. How can this not be good?
I think I know what it is.
I think you do too. It was Back to the Future.
That's what I was guessing.
God.
The really terrible sped up version of the power of love in that game never fails to amuse me.
Yes. As I saw someone famously describe it, it was Paperboy, but without the fun. And I remember Ryan played Dino
Hold
Ricky.
on, I'm trying to think if Back to the Future is worse than Dino Ricky.
Oh no, it definitely is. Dino Ricky, while really not a great game and way too BS hard for its own good, it has some modicum of quality to it. I got halfway into it before it got way too tough. Back to the Future is just monotonous, looks like crap, sounds like crap.
Thank you, Beam Software.
Yes, Beam Software, the same makers of Bigfoot. One of the worst Nintendo developers ever, until they made the game Nightshade, which is very surprisingly good. I don't know what happened there.
I actually don't mind Punisher that they did also.
Yeah, the Punisher's not a bad one either. It looks pretty fugly, but plays all right.
Yeah. It's not the most pretty game. And the only music in the game is when the saxophone guy is on screen.
Yeah, that was pretty funny.
Well,
Yeah, Captain Algebra's turned me into a little bit of an LJN apologist, and I think that once I gave Back to the Future a little bit more time, I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be. It does some interesting things. It does sort of try to follow the license a little bit. I mean, obviously it takes some weird detours, but many licensed games do. I mean, The Mermaid and Goonies 2, nobody really gets on the Goonies 2 case for that. So I don't think it's that terrible. I also probably should mention, since you mentioned Peter Pan and the Pirates, which I love that show, and that's one of the reasons why Cora, my wife, bought that game, because she loved the show as well. That actually is the only game that I haven't recorded no death run for on my channel.
really?
Just by accident, because I was trying to finish the game, and by the time I was able to finish the game, I could play it through perfectly.
Wow. Hey, it looks like Snarb is here.
So I was going to say a question kind of along those lines. What do you think is the better or worse game between Back to the Future and then Back to the Future 2 and 3?
Oh, I say 2 and 3.
I think 3 is really interesting. Like, it's a really interesting game. It's just really hard and really weird, and I don't know that I have the patience to try to understand it.
I know,
Eugene, my brother actually kind of agrees with you. He actually thinks that's a very fascinating game and concept.
Mm-hmm.
It's just everything about it that isn't the core, vaguely Metroid-esque structure of the game is just done really poorly. What gets me
it is really cool though that when you die, the DeLorean flies into the stage and drops you off again. Slightly less cool when the DeLorean drops you off into a pit.
They sure had a quality control looking at this game, I'm sure, and they were all sleeping at the job. But
Yeah.
wow.
Well, let me say one thing to everyone out there who kind of likes Back to the Future. Let's not forget that was $50. I wasn't ever getting back.
Oh no!
Poor man.
Brand new,
if I'd
full
spent
retail.
that for it, yeah.
Yeah, so it's just like
hard to defend at that price point.
Yeah, terrible. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. What would you say is your favorite can't not have this in my collection NES game? Mike?
Castlevania 3. I can't really elaborate on that. That kind of speaks for itself. Unless you want me to, but I really don't know what else to say. Castlevania 3 is excellent.
It's Castlevania 3.
There we go.
How about you, Jim?
Mine would be Mega Man 2.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, that's a good
It
one.
was the first one in the series that I played, and just kind of set me on that path of loving action platformers. And I think difficulty-wise, it was the most approachable. So that's one thing that really drew me in. Versus starting with one of the more difficult entries in the series. But yeah, Mega Man 2.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the boring, predictable answer for me is Super Mario Brothers 3.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've since playing the first Super Mario Brothers, I was a huge fan of that, and I think that those games are the ones that turned me into such a big fan of platforming games in general. But Super Mario Brothers 3 is, I think, probably what many consider like the pinnacle of NES platforming. And it had a really good balance of like it's pretty straightforward, right? And it's got a good balance of challenge, and it has a bunch of secret things in it that you can learn as you play or from like the player's guide. And that's probably one of the first games that I knew so well because I played it so much and I had read the player's guide and memorized all the secrets. I could figure out which card game I was playing based off of the positions of the cards, and I had memorized them so that I could just like zip through that. I knew how to unlock all the secrets and everything. So it was one of the first games that I really tried to master, completely. And I have really fond memories of playing that game with my mom as well. So it's just all around definitely one of my favorite games.
Nice.
Cool.
With me, it's the original Castlevania.
Hey, Rob
Nice.
and I really like Castlevania.
Yes, it was. It has been
Hard to go wrong with Castlevania.
It is not just my favorite NES game; it is my favorite game of all time.
Nice.
Hey, zombies in the chat.
Hey, what up?
So Omega Ace was working on a video series of Castlevania things. So I recorded like we're supposed to contribute like Castlevania memories to it. And he's had a while to get that out. It's not out yet, so I'm gonna ruin my answer for that one. But I'm probably one of the few people who was disappointed to get Castlevania, and the reason for that is because I had asked my mom to get me Castlevania 3, and she couldn't find it, so she came home with Castlevania instead. And I was like, this isn't as good as Castlevania 3. It's like, it seems like a more basic version of Castlevania 3. But, it was a new game, right, that I didn't have before. So I played it, and of course, I loved it, and I still love it. But, yeah, I have to be the only person who was, like, ever disappointed to get that game.
Actually, Eugene, you're not. How I got Castlevania is an interesting story in and of itself. I remember shortly before we left Connecticut, I had actually seen Castlevania 1 and 2 for rent. And I picked them up, looked at them, looked at the back, and just went, boy, do these look stupid. Put them down, moved on. That September, we're going to start school. My parents decided to buy us each a new game to go ahead and ease the transition a little bit. And I put down, because I had to stay home and do some chores, I put down my list of games to pick from, and they were like 1942, 1943, Castlevania, and Castlevania 2. And to this date, I have no idea why I put Castlevania 1 or 2 down. Not a clue. But my mom was a big fan of Haunted House for Atari, and she saw Castlevania and figured, haunted game kind of thing. So they brought that home. And they get home, and my brother comes in. He got The Adventures of Lolo, and he's thrilled. And my dad hands me my new game, and I look at it, and I was like, wait a minute. I've seen this game before. Oh, that's that dumb-looking one. So I was in the middle of writing a letter, so I just put a stack of mail and boxes on top of it and just forgot about it for an hour.
Oh, no.
Well, Ryan's still sitting there playing Lolo, and finally he's just like, I'm like, I pick up this stack, and I'm like, oh yeah, I got a new game today. I should probably try it. And it's like, Ryan, can I play my game? Oh, I'm getting really far in this. My sister had an NES, so she wasn't using it. I asked her to borrow hers, and I started playing Castlevania. And it's like, you know something? This ain't that bad. By the time I made it to stage 2, I was just like, this is the greatest game that ever existed.
Nice.
I felt that way ever since.
Awesome. Yeah. I think there's a very fair debate to be made as to whether the first or the third is better, and honestly, I do think the first is probably ultimately better just because it's simpler, it's easier, it's smoother. 3, while by all accounts a bigger game, is also much more difficult, sometimes to the point of frustration, and not as much of
Tetris
a
Chamber.
casual. Yeah, the Tetris Chamber and the stupid abandoned mine level. I mean, at least you don't have to go down that level if you pick the ghost ship route, but it's a pretty rocky game. I just rate it higher because I actually played 3 before the original, so the nostalgia switch admittedly applies there, but hey, they're both quality games no matter how you slice it. And I like 2 a lot, even if it's quite different.
Hey, I played them right in order. Once I fell in love with 1, I had to go out and rent 2.
Awesome. Hey, what'd you think of it back then?
I was intrigued because it was different. But I just met my friend Bromley, and he'd already gone through the game. I asked for a couple of tips. He got me started, and it's like, this is different, but it's great.
Mm-hmm.
No, Sharon, you're not late.
Hi.
My sister is in the stream.
Hi, Sharon.
So,
But yes, Snar brings up a good point. Says, I wonder why so many NES games had oddball sequels. Zelda 2 was the same way.
Yep.
And that's one thing that I love about the NES is it felt like developers were willing to take those kind of risks with sequels. I mean, I mentioned Mega Man 2 is my favorite game on the system, which is, the clear exception to that rule, where, every sequel is pretty much copy and pasted the one previous. But no, I was going to say Mario 2, I mean, that has its own history. But Zelda 2 is definitely a huge departure from the first. So.
And, that kind of leads me to our next topic. What is your most controversial NES, quote, hot take? Mike? Mm-hmm.
There are several I could belt out, but the one that comes right to my mind is that Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers was the better Capcom Disney game over DuckTales.
Ooh.
DuckTales is certainly not a bad game, but even for neither of those games are intended to be particularly long or difficult for the most part, but it's probably stupid for me to complain about this for a game, but even I think DuckTales feels really short. Like, there should have been a bit more to it somehow. I mean, the fact that you have to go back to the Transylvania level, like, twice more after you beat it for some weird reason, like, that kind of felt like it was kind of trawling budget there. And,
the developers did have some weird obsession with the Transylvania stage.
Yeah, they did.
And, hot take within this hot take, The Moon is the most overrated NES music of all time. I'm sick of hearing it.
That is definitely a hot take.
I always like the African Mines levels music more. What can I say?
You heard there is a track from DuckTales that was never used. It was supposed to be. There's an alternate Transylvania theme.
Oh wow!
It's on TCRF. It's on the cutting room floor. You should check it out. It's actually really good.
I gladly will. Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'll check that out too.
All right, Jim. What about you?
Don't get. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh. Hot take. I actually like the hot take that Spoot Scoop mentioned.
Oh.
That the water level on TMNT isn't actually that hard.
It's not. No. Level after that is much worse, and the game doesn't get any better from there.
Well, yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is I think the latter half of the game is much harder than everybody makes that dam level out to be.
Freaking brutal, yeah. And but by that token, I also think the Turbo Tunnel's difficulty in Battletoads is
overstated too. Yeah,
I mean,
I would
really
agree with that.
It is really hard. Don't get me wrong, and I could see where a lot of people would give up, but immediately the stage after that, the Arctic Cavern, is much worse. There are so many spikes, and you're dealing with, of course, the obligatory platformer ice physics, because everyone loves that, right?
I always skip that one if I can. I just take the warp in 3 to get out of the ice world.
Yeah, and the warp's pretty easy to remember. You just have to run into the 10th wall in the final segment. But, yeah, except maybe for the surfing level, every level after the Turbo Tunnel is much worse.
Right, right.
And that's Battletoads in a nutshell. But I'm kind of hijacking Jim's answer. I'm sorry about
No,
that.
no, no. You're fine. You're fine. Um. Oh, you might circle back to me. There was something I was going to mention, but I've forgotten it.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No, no, no. You're fine.
Okay.
How about you, Eugene?
Do I have it? People have already mentioned my hot takes. It was the dam level and Battletoads.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, the dam level and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But then also like the Battletoads thing. I don't know. Do I have a hot take?
I apologize if I stole your email thunder.
No, it's fine. I don't know. I mean, okay. Here's my hot take then. Some of the best games for the NES have only been made in the last 10 years.
Ooh.
That is a hot take.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are. I mean, Jim and I have been playing through this brand new homebrew game that just came out called Full Quiet, and it is probably better than almost, certainly most of the licensed games on the NES. It's really
Yeah,
astonishing.
I'd have to agree.
I cannot, if this had come out back in the day, first of all, there'd be lots of strategy guides for it and lots of questions about it in Nintendo Power. But also, I think it would be probably one of the best remembered games on the system, and people should not be missing out on. If you're a fan of the NES, do not miss out on some of these amazing experiences that are coming out with the recent homebrew games.
What's the game called again?
It's called Full Quiet, and
Full Quiet.
yeah, and it'll be released soon on modern consoles as well. You can buy it on cartridge at the moment, but it'll be out on Steam and Switch and all that stuff. And it's a very modern feeling kind of game, despite it coming out on the NES. To the point where if you have an adapter, a controller adapter for it, you can actually play it with a Super NES controller and map all the controls to all of the buttons. And there are many controls because there's multiple weapons to switch. There's there's obviously running, firing, jumping, and then there's also a dive function. It's just there's like a huge inventory, a huge map, so many secrets. It's almost an inscrutable game, and we're all exchanging questions and tips in a Discord right now. It's a really fascinating experience. But anyway, there are several others. Some of my favorite games for the NES. Are homebrew games, Twin Dragons and Khaled's Gamer's Second Adventure. These are all games that are very recent, but rival some of the best games on the system. So, there you go.
I've seen you mention that one on Twitter from time to time, but I really haven't taken the opportunity to look into it yet. I may have to rectify that, just because.
Khaled's Gamers?
No, the Full Quiet.
Oh, Full Quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Full Quiet is amazing.
Definitely have to look into it.
And yeah, I mean, mentioning the controls in Full Quiet, start is used like heavily in the game as one of the action buttons that allows you to dive to dodge enemies. So, as far as an example of just kind of really pushing the NES controller to its limits, like you double tap up to reload your gun, you double tap down to like hold your ground, and then you have 8 directional aiming. So yeah, it's quite advanced for what they're able to pull off on NES.
We all type Full
Well,
Quiet.
there we go.
I guess we really recommend it then.
Well, I'm sure she'll
But
ask
yeah,
me
it
later about
is-
it.
But yeah, I would say it's the most ambitious homebrew that I played that I own.
Nice.
Rad.
Well, I guess that circles around to me, and I got a doozy.
This is going to be great.
Oh, yeah. My hot take.
I was gonna say you kind of started off with a hot take, didn't you?
I don't remember
With
that.
your with your Atari better than NES.
That was just me as a kid.
Well, right. But I mean, that's definitely a hot take.
Well, here's what my current one is and has been for quite some time. Super Mario Bros. 3 is an overrated, overbloated game that is far inferior to both Mario 2 and Mario World.
no, you're
Dang
wrong.
it. Rob versus Eugene. Who will win? Fight.
I'm sorry, Mario 2 is the better game. In just
Ooh.
it is so much better.
I can see an argument. I can see an argument for Mario 2 being a better game, although it is not my personal favorite. But I cannot accept that Super Mario World is better.
I like it better. I like Mario 1 better than Mario 3.
Wow.
Of course, BL85 is going to go ahead and leave. No, he's not. I rented Mario 3 when it first came out. I was super excited for it. And then the game just dragged and dragged and dragged. I left my Nintendo on overnight just to, save my progress for one thing. And over the weekend I had it, I was like, I'm going to buy this game, I'm not even going to rent this again.
Wow.
I do own a copy now, but it's the Famicom version. But yeah, it's just so overloaded, and that pipe world sucks.
Yeah,
I could see an argument made for the length of the game without any way of saving your progress.
Yeah.
I will agree on that point.
Yeah, it really could have used at least a password or a save. And yes, Snarb mentioned the warp whistles, which that's kind of a mea culpa, but not really, because you can't carry over any of your items in your inventory into levels, so it's not like a really hard save. I will say that the Super Mario All-Stars version, which does save your progress, does inherently make the game a good deal better, but admittedly I prefer how the NES version looks and sounds, so it's still not perfect. I'm going to take a guess here. Is there a ROM hack that adds a save feature to the game?
I was just going to mention, there's actually, I'm sure there's a standalone, there must be a standalone ROM hack for it. There's actually, Infidelity, I think that's his name, made a ROM hack. Basically, he made an Super Mario Brothers All-Stars for the NES. So it collects all three of those games, and carries over the save features and the continued features from those. So that would probably be the best of both worlds, because I like the NES, the 8-bit music and art more than the Super NES version.
Also, here's a minor complaint I have about it. Like, compared to the bright colors of Mario 2, Mario 3 just kind of looks washed out. Like, it's...
I don't know if I agree with that, personally. I do think the game looks really good, but, Dyer, if it is any sympathy aside from what you just said, I was never the hugest fan of SMB3 either. I'm more of a world booster, and I don't want Eugene to leave us, but I'm just speaking my... I don't think I dislike it as venomously as you do. It's just that if I were to make a top 5 Super Mario list, I don't think 3 would make the cut.
I'll give it this. It is playable. It can be fun in small doses, but it will never make any kind of top X anything list of mine, except for maybe
okay, hold on a second though. It's a long game, right?
Yes.
To play through every stage of that game is like probably 3 to 4 hours. But like Blaster Master is a longer game than that.
True.
Yeah.
I would say so.
You can't skip in Blaster Master.
I will say this, though. It is not my least favorite Mario game. I have a couple more, and I'm not even talking about like the CDI stuff. A couple more games I actually feel are way more overrated than Mario 3.
Yeah, I know at least one, but that wouldn't be germane to the NES, so...
Exactly.
It would be germane to Nintendo, but
yes.
We can probably see where I'm going with that. Let's perish the thought for now, I guess. Leave that for another roundtable in the future, whatever that would be. So I don't know.
Well, given that, then what would you say, Mike, is the hardest NES game you've ever played?
Cobra Triangle.
I knew that was going to be your answer.
Without even thinking, that one's like a Pavlovian reflex. Anytime anyone mentions Cobra Triangle, I just kind of curl up and cry.
I have witnessed Mike streaming Cobra Triangle before, and it is a sight to behold.
The entire stream ended. That was actually the last game I played for the night. There's a clip that my friend Kate took that has me fighting the first boss in the game, the badass sea serpents on the cover. I know Rob's fond of saying "fry the monster."
Fry the monster.
Yeah, right.
And I unfortunately had a crappy version, a crappy weapon. It's like the Gradius-esque power-up system allows you to change your guns, and really you should try and vie for the shotgun spread one if you can, but I had the one that fires a single bullet that you then press the A button again, then splits into 4 bullets. Really poor for fire rate and terrible for taking on a boss. But with like 2 seconds to spare, I killed the boss. Unfortunately, the timer does not immediately stop, and in the buffer between when I killed the boss and when time actually ran out, I died and lost my last life due to a stupid Kaizo freaking bad game design BS crappity crap. I just broke down laughing out of sheer insanity for like a minute and bid everyone a good night.
Yes, he did.
I'm gonna see if I can try and find that clip. I think you guys will get a kick out of it.
Well, while you're doing that, how about you, Jim?
Licensed NES. I'm going to say Ghosts and Goblins is the
Good choice.
is the hardest game that I've actually been able to beat. It's going to say honorable mention for Battletoads, but I haven't been able to play all the way through that. So, I mean, maybe that says something, but I haven't really put the time in. But it's going to say outside of licensed NES games, the Battle Kid series of homebrews are insanely difficult, and I mean, are pretty much that way by design. Eugene, I know, has managed to play through both of them. I've beaten the first one, but not the second. But yeah, back to Ghosts and Goblins. Just the fact that playing through the game once is not enough to actually get the true ending to the game. You have to do a second loop on essentially a higher difficulty. And the only saving grace I would say with Ghosts and Goblins is the fact that there are unlimited continues. Otherwise, I don't think I would have been able to beat it.
Yeah, I hold to sort of this old school rule that it is inevitably stage 3 in a video game that has structured levels to it, where the difficulty takes a noticeable jump.
Mm-hmm.
Ghosts and Goblins gets bad in stage 2. That's not a good sign.
Freaking Big Men Village.
I hate the big men so much. That's a real... Like, why'd they have to take 10 hits? Like, 6 or so would have been enough to sell them, but that's just gratuitous. That's almost as much as the poorly named unicorn takes. It's a Cyclops. What the hell?
Yeah, I actually think stage 2 in Ghosts and Goblins is one of the hardest stages in the game.
Yeah, anyway. I agree.
Yeah. I was going to say stage 3 with all the red armors, the red devils. I actually feel, even with their erratic pattern, that it's more manageable than stage 2. And just going through the second, house with all the big men is, just infuriating. And then you get the crows that fly in with kind of their oscillating, like Medusa head like pattern.
Yeah, I have some nostalgia for that game, but I don't have as much tolerance to play not even the original arcade Ghosts and Goblins anymore. I still love Ghouls and Ghosts, though. That's a superior sequel.
I enjoyed my time with that one, too.
The thing with Ghosts and Goblins, which I also despise and think is way too hard, it's janky, right? Which is and random, like you said, erratic, right? That's tough. But I will say that I don't know if I could truly say that a game that has unlimited continues is one of the hardest games on the NES, because you can just get through it, like if you keep trying, right?
Bash your head against the wall long enough.
Yeah,
I would
if you care enough.
I would
But
almost say the Famicom game Holy Diver is an exception. Unlimited Continues or no, that game is evil.
Yes, it
oh, I
is.
still need to
Yeah,
finish playing
I've
that
heard
one.
that. I've heard that.
That is a
Although,
tough game.
Good luck,
but yeah,
Eugene.
for the most part, I do agree. Cobra Triangle does not have continues, so I think my answer is valid. But I don't want to steal your thunder. Go ahead.
So like what Jim was saying, I feel like most of the games that I would think of as like really hard are either like I've actually beaten them. Like I finished Battletoads as a kid somehow. I've beaten Ghosts and Goblins, Ninja Gaiden 3, all those typically hard games. I think that for me, and this is going to contradict what I just said about games that have unlimited continues. I think I'm going to pick Adventure Island.
Ooh, that's a solid pick. Ooh.
Because although there is unlimited continues if you know about the B and can successfully not mess up entering the code when the game ends, I have not struggled harder even compared to Battle Kid 2 than I did in 8.3 of Adventure Island, where I still don't know for sure I could pass that jump at the end of the stage because it felt completely random to me. I have no idea. I'm sure I know you can do it consistently. I've seen like Solid Nate. I've seen people streaming the game and doing no death runs in the game. I can't do it though. I have no idea how to get through that section. And then 8.4 is misery if you lose your weapon. So that I worked really hard for Adventure Island, harder than I have for some many other difficult NES games.
Yeah, I don't know why I woke up someday when I had my NES hooked up and decided, you know what, I've had Adventure Island for a while, I'm going to go beat it. And the last two levels, 7 and 8, are just face punch after face punch. You need eggshell perfect timing to get through all those stupid torches and spiders and frogs! Those stupid frogs!
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, the thing that separates it from something like Ghosts and Goblins, though, is like as frustrating as it is, as difficult as it is, I still enjoy Adventure Island. I felt like if I could just master it enough, I could do it. Like the controls were really pretty good in it. It's more fun to play than Ghosts and Goblins. Ghosts and Goblins just isn't fun. Like,
I would agree with that for the most part.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about this the whole time everyone else has been talking. You had something to say, Jim?
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't know if Nick, Geeks with Cash, is still here, but I think he would disagree on Adventure Island being fun.
Yeah.
Adventure Island 2 is better, to be fair.
See, even though I've played Adventure Island, I own the Famicom version. My major experience with Adventure Island was through its original version, Wonder Boy.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's just as tough. But here's the thing. I've been thinking about this. I really don't have an answer. I kind of suck at video games as a rule. I mean, I have my certain games that I can blow right through without a problem. Man, I finished all the Splatterhouse games, every Castlevania game up to a point, all the Gradius games again up to a point, and so on. But if I really, really had to think about it, I just don't have an answer. So many of them kick my ass on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Well,
NES
suppose...
Sorry.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
No, that's all right. I was going to say NES hard, I think, is definitely a thing. The threshold of skill needed to beat several of them, I would say, is a lot higher than later generations games.
Yes.
I actually kind of went into collecting NES games when I did, about 4 or 5 years ago now. I kind of went in with the expectation that it's like, okay, let's get these games, let's play them and have fun with them. If you can't finish them, that's okay. And actually have surprised myself with how many I've been able to get through just putting the effort into it. So, but no, I definitely agree that NES hard, I think, is an apt statement.
I will say there is one game which does require an incredible amount of skill to finish, which, because of what it is, kind of gets looked down on, and because it's not what people are expecting out of the game with this title. But at one point, I was dedicated enough to actually go through and finish the thing. This was like back in, 30 some odd years ago. I've never done it since, just at one time. And that game would be Predator.
Ah,
Pink pants and go-go boots.
That'd be the one. Never have I seen a game where Arnold Schwarzenegger wears pink pants and go-go boots. But I will say I struggled through that game. I made it to the final boss. It was a giant flying predator head, and I killed it, I think, with like one hit remaining. I pulled a Bromley.
Nice.
I've never been able to do it again.
Also, Rob, I don't want to over promote your abilities, but didn't you beat Rekka once as well?
oh wow.
That's impressive.
I believe I did, if I remember
I
correctly.
have never even been able to beat Stage 2 fairly in that game. That's really monumental, dude.
Well, the circumstances are a little fuzzy on that. It was a repro that came from a guy I had known at the time in Japan. He said it was a hex-edited version of it. I don't know if that was just how he was able to get it onto the cart or what.
Oh.
A copy of Mario 3 was sacrificed for that Rekka repro.
No wonder you like it so much.
Womp womp.
But I distinctly remember finishing the game. So there's some games I'm good at, some games I'm not. But most games I'm not good at, so there you go. I finished more Genesis games than I ever finished NES games. That tells you anything.
Cool deal. I was going to suggest that if there's a game that you wanted to mention for this, you can take another one of my most hated games that I've never finished without the Game Genie and put in Akari Warriors if you wanted to.
Oh, dear God. There's only one good Ikari game, and that's 3.
Yeah, the 3 on the NES is surprisingly much better than it has any right to be, especially considering the original arcade version of that was honestly pretty crappy in my opinion.
Yeah.
But
I had actually considered the first Akari Warriors for least favorite game.
very good choice. I grew up with that piece of crap. I would totally agree with you. Not knowing that Akari Warriors 2 Victory Road was arguably even worse. I think Rob and I would agree that Guerrilla War is the true best Akari game.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
No question about that.
I agree with that.
So, let's see here. This is kind of an interesting question, but how did you feel about the state of video games overall when the NES was finally discontinued in '94? Mike?
Again, baby of the bunch here. I believe I was only 5 years old when that happened. And
Yes, he is our own little bio miracle.
Bon Petit Oopa. That's a really good game. But at the time, I don't think I gave it much thought because I was, I still really enjoyed my NES despite also having an SNES at the time. They were almost kind of like my children in a, sad, nerdy way. But
You were 5.
yeah. Yeah, you know what? Maybe children's not the best word to put in there, but I don't know how else to describe it. It didn't really dawn on me that the NES had stopped after in the West was close around. Yeah. The last NES game in the West was Wario's Woods, if I'm not mistaken, which also got an SNES port. I had the SNES port, not the NES one, but yeah, back then, I'm not sure how much stock I really gave on it. It just kind of subtly passed under my nose, but the fact that there were still all these NES games that I had yet to discover and would keep getting for a long time, I think, it didn't really depress me back then because of how exciting it was to discover stuff that I hadn't heard of before. Of course, now I guess I kind of reached a plateau with that, and that excitement is not as present. But that also I have as much of a library to go back to whenever I want is also very comforting to know. The NES being discontinued didn't really sink in for me as much as the SNES being discontinued was, and we are now fully in the era of 3D for better or worse. And I'm like, oh, video games are different now. Oh, okay. But yeah, the NES I think at least went out on a pretty respectful note. The twilight years of it, as I call it, produced some real darn good action games. Like I think '92 was like Power Blade and Vice Project Doom, and Star Trek X2 Zoda's Revenge was one of the last games made for it, and that's a pretty darn good one. So it didn't die unceremoniously. I feel just just kind of on a quiet. It went out on a quiet, peaceful note, like my favorite band Rush did. So,
Yes.
yeah, figure that'd be a good way to cap it. But yeah,
So they're my favorite band too. I agree with you. How about you, Jim?
yeah,
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of echo a lot of what Mike said. At the time, I don't think I was really all that aware. Um, and I mean, I think part of that was, like I said earlier, renting was a big part of my experience with the NES. So I only owned, a couple games for it. And I know as soon as like the one kid in the neighborhood got the Super Nintendo, I was like immediately um, completely swayed by the cult of the new, and it's like, wow, this is completely awesome, and I pretty much lost interest in NES at that moment and was fully on board with Super Nintendo. Now, I mean, I think it was like a year or two down the road before I finally got my own Super Nintendo. But um, I guess for me it was kind of an unceremonious end. I mean, I think I was vaguely aware of the fact that support for it was ending and the focus was shifting to Super Nintendo. But I guess in my child mind, didn't really grasp the impact of that.
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a fair assessment of it. I also wished I had gotten into the Genesis around that time. Unfortunately, I was kind of a Sega hater until the Dreamcast, but that's another story for another time.
How about you, Eugene?
Yeah, when I think I just wasn't that interested in whatever was coming next. Like, Nintendo Power had been gradually shifting to more coverage of the Super NES, and I think when that balance tipped is when I really stopped reading Nintendo Power, right? Like I just, aside from Game Boy, I just cared about NES games. So I never actually stopped playing NES games after they stopped making the systems and the games, and I'm still playing them. I guess I went to college and I still had my NES with me. Other people had N64s after a while, and I just had my NES. And the thing is, when I went to college and I started working, is when I had the money to buy NES games. So eBay was still pretty new, and I went nuts on eBay buying up games. And I lived in Manhattan, and there was a Funko Land in the Manhattan Mall, and I would make many visits there. So I built up a huge collection of Nintendo games. Back then, I didn't really have time to play them, but I was just buying them all up, So, and I remember the Funko Land clerks like kind of making fun of me hanging out in the NES section. They were like trying to sell me a PlayStation. I was like, yeah, I'm good.
That jerk. God.
I'm good, thanks. So yeah, it just never. The thing is, like, I had a Super NES for a little while. Like my sister had one, and she left it at my mom's place for a while, and so I played some Super NES games. And there were some games that I had always wanted to play because they looked really cool in Nintendo Power, but I wasn't that interested. Weirdly enough, and even today, like I'm playing more Super NES and Genesis and other things, but I never stopped loving NES. So time basically moved on without me. Most of the modern consoles that I got, or most of the newer consoles I got as gifts from friends. Like my N64 was a gift, my Wii was a gift. My Wii U was a gift. Actually, my Switch was a gift as well. Nobody ever gave me a GameCube, so I've kind of been pulled into modern gaming slightly unwillingly. I guess people are just like, you got to play more than Nintendo games at some point.
Kicking
But
and stealing.
yeah, and I'm still buying Nintendo games today, which is kind of ridiculous. But here I am.
Yep. As the NES alphanumeric would, if anyone hasn't watched that, I know a lot of people here have. Heck, that's how I was introduced to you in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yep, same here.
Yep. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I knew it was all changing, but I was also I'm gonna just go out on a limb and say I'm a bit older than everybody else here. And while we got the NES in '89, a friend of mine had got the Genesis right around the same time, so I was able to play that at the same time, and that really hooked me. And we got one of our own about a year later, and then Super NES came out, and I was kind of following series at this point. I knew I really enjoyed Gradius and Castlevania and all that, so when I found out, we were going to get Gradius 3 and Castlevania 4 and Contra 3 on the Super NES, well, it's a must-buy. And then I was introduced to Splatterhouse through my same friend with the Genesis when he got his TurboGrafx, so that got me into the Turbo. So by the time the NES went out, I knew it was over. But what I didn't like, because this was '94, and that was kind of a bit of a slump for me. I was still collecting for the cartridge stuff that was good. But then, all the magazines are all like, multimedia is the wave of the future. CD this, 3D that. 32-bit, 64-bit.
That was a time. The
The
Philips
bit
CDI.
wars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The CDI, the 3DO. I remember looking at this stuff and going, what is this crap?
Accurate.
And then
Yeah.
the Jaguar showed up. Even the PlayStation at first, I was just like, no. Of course, the PlayStation, seeing as how I've been following series this whole time, it was the 1-2 punch of Symphony of the Night and Gradius Gaiden for me with the PlayStation.
Mm-hmm.
But
Great air. Oh, man.
but
It was Final Fantasy VII in my case. What swayed me to PlayStation.
everyone I knew was so super stoked about Final Fantasy VII. I was the only one going, yeah, screw your Final Fantasy. I got Castlevania Symphony of the Night coming out.
Actually, Symphony was also the game that got me on board for the PlayStation. I actually got an N64 first, but when Symphony came out, I highly regretted my decision.
Yeah.
So I had to wait a whole year until I could ask for the PlayStation for Christmas, and I never looked back, so that's cool.
Yeah, I was going to say, looking back now, I would definitely give the nod to Symphony over Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah.
Rad. Very rad.
Mm-hmm.
I played
And
Symphony of the Night in a friend's dorm room, and thought it was amazing. For some reason, it never crossed my mind to buy a PlayStation though. I thought I would just play it at his place, and somehow I never did end up playing it with him. But I just had such great memories of it. I remember he let me play for a little while. I had the controller, and I was fighting probably one of the early bosses. And it was spewing fire or whatever, and I just blocked it with the shield, and he freaked out. He was like, "I didn't know you could do that." I was like, I just did it. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I thought it was such a great game, but it just never crossed my mind. You could go buy a PlayStation.
well, here's the kicker about the whole PlayStation thing with me, which kind of leads me into a topic we haven't covered yet. Namely, the topic of importing and the Famicom. See, because I had already imported a little bit before this happened, and then when the PlayStation came, I had my system modded so I could go ahead and play Gradius Gaiden. But what was your first experience with the Famicom, Mike?
That's a very good question. Honestly, I don't think I ever actually played an imported Famicom game until I got those from you. that you sent off when I don't know how much you want to get into that because I know it's not your favorite time in your life.
Yeah, that wasn't a good time for me, but thank you for holding on to them for me.
Hey, no worries. I know I got Gradius 2 from you. Did you also give me One Paku Graffiti?
Yes.
Okay. And was that it, or was there another one?
It would have been those two, because those were the ones I
Okay.
wanted to hold on to the most, because I guarantee you, if you hadn't held on to them for me, they would have been sold. And
Yeah.
that would not have been good.
I definitely enjoyed them while I had them, and I forget. Did you allow me to keep the converter also? At least I don't remember. Or did you ask for that one back as well? Sorry,
I think I'd let you keep the converter.
it was so long ago.
I know you still
brain
have the
is-
LCD Splatterhouse game, which I really like back, but that's that's neither here nor there.
I could maybe give it to you if you just give me a bit to search for it, but that's that's also.
We'll discuss that later.
Yes, Firehouse One Bacher Graffiti, great, adorable, goofy spin-off, lots of movie references, and real shame we never got that one over here. Double shame that we never got any version of Gradius 2 over here until I think the Gradius collection on the PSP, which had the arcade version in there, but I actually kind of like the NES version more because it's not as brutally difficult. It still is very difficult. You got to work for your victory, but it's a real technical accomplishment, and I don't know why we didn't get it over here. It's just good, and I'm still mad we didn't.
I'm pretty sure it was Konami's custom chips.
Oh yeah, I guess that would track.
Probably, yeah.
It was it
BGM's
was a
here.
very impressive game for its time. I am really glad that we at least got Life Force. That's one of my favorite shoot 'em ups on the NES, but it was, I think, erroneously called Gradius 2 by some publications at the time,
Yeah.
which I guess it sort of kind of was in a way, but not really.
Further muddles things.
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately.
How about you, Jim?
I would say it was with emulation was when I really kind of became more aware of Famicom offerings. That probably wasn't until I was into SNES and maybe even PlayStation that I started looking into emulating NES. And I mentioned being a big fan of Final Fantasy on NES, and that love continued. One of my favorite games, and depending on my mood, my favorite game ever is Final Fantasy VI, which we got as Final Fantasy III here. And it was actually that knowledge that our Final Fantasy III was actually the sixth game of the series that made me curious about the other Final Fantasy games. So that was kind of my first exposure was downloading ROMs of Final Fantasy 2 and 3 on NES, or Famicom, and then working with at the time very crude translation patches of those ROMs. The Final Fantasy 3 one I had, I think, was like 30% of the game was translated, which was mostly like menus and items. So trying to figure out what to do was really definitely an experience, but a memorable one because I feel like I did make it fairly, decent progress into the game, despite not really having much idea of what I was doing other than, just going around talking to random NPCs and getting into random battles. But as far as actually importing for Famicom, that probably wasn't until I got back into collecting, like I said, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And it's already mentioned here, I think the first one that I knew I had to have was Splatterhouse One Paku Graffiti.
There you go.
And shortly after that was, probably going to butcher this, but Boku no Dracula-kun, Kid Dracula for Famicom. So yeah, those were the first two that I had to have, and I still don't have, let me see. I'm looking at my shelf. Yeah, I only own 6 games on Famicom, so I still haven't gotten, still mostly a untapped um, area of collecting that I haven't gotten hugely into.
Oh yeah.
But no, I was going to say, I feel like, the licensed, um, U.S. licensed NES library is pretty extensive, but then you add Famicom on top of that, and Famicom Disk System on top of that, and I mean, there's just so much out there to explore.
Yeah. Now, I gotta say, Eugene, you're probably one of the biggest Famicom adopters that I personally know.
Which is weird, actually. So like many, I think I was at least aware that there was a whole other library of games, on the Famicom, probably even back to like Nintendo Power, because occasionally they would mention games.
Mm.
Um, but I never looked into it that much. They all seemed like inaccessible or just like, it's not something that I could really take advantage of. Um, Technically, the first Famicom import game that I have is actually. Do you remember when I think was it the 20th Nintendo anniversary? They made those NES Mini Game Boy Advance cartridges.
Yeah.
Well, in Japan, they had the Famicom Mini GBA cartridges, and around then, I had learned that the version of Super Mario Brothers 2, the Japanese Super Mario Brothers 2, Lost
Mm-hmm.
Levels, the version that we got in All Stars, and even in Super Mario DX on the Game Boy, was like a modified version of it. Like it wasn't the original game. They made it easier.
Yeah.
And one of the Famicom Mini cartridges that they released was Super Mario Brothers 2, the original game, which of course was a Famicom Disk System game, but they made it like a yellow cartridge and everything. So I imported that. So I imported a GBA game, but technically I was also importing a Famicom game.
Yeah.
But again, I kind of resisted looking more into Famicom games and playing them until I started watching this YouTube series called Crontendo.
Yes.
Where,
Yes.
Nintendo.
yeah,
Good
it's
stuff.
great. He's been running through Dr. Sparkle. He's been running through every Nintendo slash Famicom game in order of release, and I discovered a ton of interesting looking games through that. And one of the reasons I got an EverDrive was so that I could play those Famicom games. And I kept saying to myself, okay, well, I'm fine playing Famicom games on the EverDrive because I don't have to worry about adapters and I like how NES games look anyway, and I can get translation patches, whatever. The first Famicom game, proper Famicom game that I bought was Super Mario Brothers 3, just because that's my favorite NES game. I was like, I should have the Famicom version of it too, and it's slightly different. So I bought that even though I didn't really have any way to really play it. I had no adapter. But it's really only in the last year when I found how easy it was, how terribly easy it is to order Famicom games online. And I found some sites, namely J4U, Japan 4U, that had like really, really cheap prices, expensive shipping, but very cheap prices for the cartridges. Certainly cheaper than buying them individually on eBay.
This is
And
true.
I kind of went nuts and just started buying up as many of the Famicom games that I could play without any sort of language barrier. And currently, I've slowed down, but currently my Famicom cartridge collection went from like one to about 100, like kind of in the last year. So, um,
Nice.
yes, so I've definitely gone full tilt on that. Got like adapters and everything, and playing more Famicom games. I started streaming them and everything too. Like it's they're still NES games, at their heart, right? Or I guess
Yeah.
NES games are Famicom games at their heart. And as much as I have the nostalgia for the great cartridges, the Famicom cartridges are just so darn cute. Like they're so cool, like so many different
Mhm.
colors and cool
Mhm.
labels, and like I just fell for them. So yeah.
Well,
Valid.
I gotta say that with me, the whole Famicom thing started with the gaming magazines in the late '80s. Ironically enough, I remember reading the letters column of I think it was Game Players magazine, and someone had written in that they had received as a gift from Japan from a relative a copy of Super Mario Brothers 3. Now,
Oh.
of course, this is like 2 years for the American release. And they're like, the cartridge is all yellow and it's half the size of the regular Nintendo games. Is there some kind of a converter I can use to play it on my Nintendo? And of course, they're like, oh, no, that no such converter exists and no one's ever going to make one. So you'll have to wait for the American release. But
Dynamite?
yeah, well, they weren't going to say that.
Okay, all right.
But then after that, like GamePro issue 1 came out. And they had a section called Overseas Prospects. First game they covered was Mario 3. So this hype to the U.S. release had been building for a couple of years by the time I finally got to play it. And then in issue 2, they showed Gradius 2.
Ah.
And
Oh, yeah.
of course, so I had no idea how to get a hold of these games. So you fast forward to 94, and this brand new game shop had opened up in the town next door to where I lived. So my friend Bronley and I go over there, and we walk in. Of course, they got a couple arcade machines set up, whole bunch of games for like every platform. So we're looking around, and I glanced up at one point and noticed stuff hanging from the ceiling. So I'm like, what is it? Wait a minute. Those are game boxes, but they're for the Famicom. And I'm very curious at this point. And as I'm walking along, I happen to notice a little silver box. And it's like, wait a minute. That's Gradius 2! So the owner comes out at that point and says hi. And is like, hey, I got a question for you. Are you selling any of these games? And he just looks at me with this look and he's like, you mean you want to buy one? Yeah. Really? I didn't think anyone would want one of these. Yes, actually, I'm very curious. So he goes in the back and he brings out this huge tub full of Famicom games. And I'm just sitting, my jaw's almost on the floor at this point. And I'm looking through this whole thing and it's like, well, I definitely want that one right there. Yeah, and he had a couple of converters too. So he's like, well, you know, the Nintendo had that lockout chip, so it might not work on yours. Like, well, if I bring it in, can we test it? Sure, we did, and it worked fine. So I got Gradius 2, complete in box, converter, and I happened to notice another game which looked a lot like Castlevania. That was Holy Diver. I got that. I got that too. Again, complete in box. And I'm expecting, $50-$100 for all this. And he's like, oh, well, you go both games and the converter for $20.
Wow.
Sold.
Brand.
Ended up going back and getting a couple other games from him as time went on, like Maze of Gallius and Airwolf and whatnot. But that just kind of lit a fire under me right there, and I was very curious from that point on as to what else we'd missed.
Which adapter was it? Was it the Honeybee or?
It was.
Yeah. Gold standard, literally gold standard. I think it actually is gold.
Yep. And it wasn't just me who walked out with some Famicom games either. Brawley walked out with a copy of Dragon Spirit.
Oh yeah.
My friend Bo was with us too. He left with a couple of games in converter. So yeah, I know he didn't sell all his Famicom stuff to us, but if I had the money, I would have bought it all. He even had a disc system there at the time when I just read about it. And one of the games he had was Oopa.
Oh, nice.
So, but yeah, that's how it all started with me, and I've never looked back. Oh, but well, we all know how we feel about the Famicom now.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going on 11 o'clock now. So let's say we close things out with maybe a couple of personal stories, something we haven't covered. Mike, you got any good ones?
This is the point where I unfortunately falter. I can certainly tell you all about the games that I like, but, extracurricular life stories aren't really my forte. I'm a very, very boring person. Although, crap. I don't even have I don't even have one that's relatively complimentary. I guess the closest I could say is that I was very proud to have beaten Ninja Gaiden at the age of 15. That was one I had been working on for a long time, because if anyone who's played Ninja Gaiden knows that that final level is not only really heinous, but if you die at any of the bosses, and there were 3 of them, you get booted all the way back to the beginning of that stage.
Back to 6-1.
Yeah. So I just remember I actually did grudge through that stage 3 times, because if nothing else, you at least managed to keep your Art of the Fire Wheel if you managed to go all the way back through the stage. Because, like, if you beat the first boss, the Masked Devil, then for some reason your darn sub-weapon gets taken away when you have to fight Jackio. But then if you get back there, you at least do have that advantage, and the Fire Wheel really helped to beat him. Then the final boss, the Demon Jashin, I died to again, and then I got booted back. I had the Fire Wheel then, it helped then, and I just felt glad to see the end of this game that I had for as long as I did. It's still one of my favorite games nowadays, but that's the best I can give you off the top of my head. Sorry.
You mean you're not even going to tell us about the scary green guy?
Oh yeah, I guess I could. I mean, would you like me to?
It's a funny story, I think.
Okay, well, Mabu, the villain from Rolling Thunder, gave me literal nightmares as a kid.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's just something about his dead eyeless expression and that creepy little sound that he makes when he his laughing noise on the NES version of Rolling Thunder. Just, I don't know, it scared me really badly, and I kept having nightmares that distorted his image to look worse than how he was. No, really, he was there for a really long time. Until I just got the gumption that I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't let this keep happening. I'm just gonna face my fears and then, look at the guy. And I actually sort of did it as a sort of psychological immersion thing where I just heard his creepy little laugh first without looking at him before I did then go to actually look at the guy himself, and it was still pretty creepy, yeah, but not nearly as bad as my stupid little subconscious had built him up to be. This actually kind of reminds me of an episode of Doug, the Nicktoon Doug, where, he was having really terrible nightmares about a movie monster that he couldn't even look at. And then when he actually did see the thing, it was very cheaply made, and it really cracked him up, and he managed to conquer his fear there. So that's kind of what happened with me and Mabu as well. Yeah, it was certainly a sort of childish. It was definitely a grow-up moment for me, as what could relatively be said, but certainly it doesn't frighten me nowadays as how really painfully difficult the game is. I eventually did beat it. It does give you passwords at least, but oh boy, that took some effort.
And just an aside, you'll be able to read Mike's story in full in the upcoming book, Digital Archaeology.
Ding, ding, ding.
How about you, Jim?
I don't know. I guess I haven't a whole lot about this topic either, but I guess with the NES, big part of my love of the console comes from nostalgia, and a game that I didn't mention as my favorite, but again, kind of depending on my mood, it might be my favorite NES game, is The Adventures of Lolo. And part of that reason is that it is without a doubt my dad's favorite NES game. And this is one that, of all games that we should have owned on NES, Adventures of Lolo was definitely that game for the number of times that we rented that. And I just have fond memories of being a kid, and I wouldn't even be the one playing the game, but I would be watching my dad play, and like together, it's like, oh well, maybe if you try pushing that block over there, that might work, or shoot that guy first, or pick up that heart first, and you just have really fond memories of just kind of puzzling out the game together, and just being like this, time that I got to spend together with my dad. Just really makes me have fond memories for the game. And, I think it's a great game in and of itself, but definitely, that added memory on top of it really, cements it as one of my favorites.
Very nice. I have similar memories of my parents playing Atari. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you, Eugene?
Yeah, I have lots of random recollections and fond memories too. But I'll share my weirdest NES experience. So I've been fortunate in that over the years because I'm one of the few people that certainly my friends and acquaintances know who still plays NES. I've inherited a lot of their games, and even in one case somebody's system because they just don't have any use for them anymore, and they just give them to me. Which is also how I ended up with a lot of sports games and game show games that I never would have purchased even at Funkoland, just to have them just to add to my collection. But the weirdest way I've ever received NES games is I was living in Astoria, Queens, in New York, and I was coming home one day from work, and I found a shoebox on the curb on my street. And I just looked because I probably was thinking it had books or something in it. And I looked inside of it, and it was a box of NES games.
Wow.
And this was 2000, 2001 probably. And it wasn't just in my neighborhood. It was literally the street that I live on that still had a working Nintendo inside with my collection. So I'm looking at the box. I'm looking around is this trash? What is this doing here? And I took it. I was this is clearly garbage. Somebody just left it out on the side of the road. I'm just taking it, and I'm pretty sure it had a bunch of sports games. I think that might be where I got my copy of Rambo from. I don't remember specifically what games were in that box. But it just happened to be somebody threw out a bunch of NES games on the street that probably was the only one in the neighborhood that somebody would have actually wanted them. And it was actually in that neighborhood that I also got my only NES yard sale find. Also around 2000 or so. That's where I got my copy of Mega Man 6 for $14 at a yard sale. I was on my way to dinner and I just stopped off at this yard sale and was like, oh my gosh, and I think it was the only NES game that they had, so I bought it. Still have yet to play it. I'll probably stream that this year, I think. I was thinking it's probably finally time. But yeah, that was definitely one of the strangest experiences.
Well, I have a whole book's worth of stories, but if for anyone who hasn't read Memoirs of a Virtual Caveman, it too will be available later this year. But I will leave you with a couple of interesting stories from it. My sister specifically requested I tell a story about her father. Now, he liked Atari a lot. He used to play with my mom all the time at head-to-head competitive games like Canyon Bomber and Air Sea Battle and whatnot. But as time went on, that was something they just didn't do anymore. And the Atari went to us. Then they bought us an NES, and he always maintained all I need is a joystick with one button and a copy of Space Invaders. I'm fine. So, sometime, I'd say early 91, he's going to walk our dogs one night. And Ryan had been playing Mega Man 3, which he got him for Christmas. So, and at this point, Ryan had paused the game to go to the bathroom or something. So, I'm sitting there doing something, in the adjacent room. All of a sudden, I hear the game start back up, but I hadn't seen Ryan. I'm like, what's going on? So, sure enough, I get up, I look in my brother's room, and there's Dad standing there with our dogs playing Mega Man 3. And I just kind of go, And he pauses it real quick and puts the controller down. He's like, I just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. I see. So, anyway, he leaves. Ryan comes back a couple minutes later, and next thing I hear is, "Hey, who's been messing with my game?" I'm like, "Ryan, you're not going to believe this one." I told him what happened. Now, there was something that happened to me. I mean, in the mid-'90s, I was, as I mentioned before, I was really disillusioned with what was going on with the modern state of gaming, kind of like I am now. Except it was worse then. But I had recently discovered stuff like pawn shops and flea markets and whatnot, so I was starting to get NES games really cheap. And I was also working my first real job. I had a couple before that, but for whatever reason, I got laid off from one of them because they botched a $500,000 job. Another one didn't last because that whole thing was stupid. That's a long story. I won't tell that. Anyway, I started working at a local supermarket. And I was up front at the time, and it was right after the N64 had come out. And this particular supermarket, which no one should mention the name of, Sharon, because we're on live stream and I'm protecting my wallet. They had a policy where basically you go to walk the customer out regardless of, you don't ask them or anything like that. You just take their card and go. If they say no, that's fine. But anyway, so I'm helping this lady out to her car. And for whatever reason, probably because I was still fairly young and a guy, I must know a little bit about video games. So somehow the N64 comes up. We're talking about it. And she's like, "Do you know if they're ever going to have a converter that you can play original Nintendo games on?" I'm like, "No, probably not. Nintendo doesn't really do that." It's just like, well, here's the thing. My mother-in-law just gave us some games, but they're for the original Nintendo, and we can't use them now. That's terrible. And I'm like, yeah, sorry. But anyway, get out to the car, pop her trunk. I'm loading up her groceries, and she's got a box with some games in the back. So I finish up. I'm going to shut her trunk, and she stops me, reaches in the box, pulls out the games, hands them to me, and says, "Here, consider these your tip." Because I also mentioned along the way that I still had my NES. And of course, I'm immediately like, "Whoa, thank you." So before I go inside, I go to my car to go ahead and drop them off. So I take a look at them. I got Tecmo Baseball. Not a fan. Pro Wrestling. It's pro wrestling.
Not bad.
I got The Empire Strikes Back, which I'd actually been hunting for at the time. I shouldn't have, because as much as I love the movie Empire, it suffers from Back to the Future syndrome. It sucks. And the other game was Metal Gear.
Cool.
So when I got home that night, I gave Tecmo Baseball and Pro Wrestling to Ryan, and I kept Empire and Metal Gear. And yeah, that was the best tip I ever got working there. And considering that place frowned on accepting tips, I had people. One woman once, she's trying to give me a tip, and one of my managers was out front watching, and I'm like, "I'm sorry, man, can't accept it." She actually just shoved it down the apron I had in front. She's like, and then she presses another bill into my hand and says, "Give it to the guy that helped us." Okay. So I go up fully expecting to get chewed out, but I was told that, she insisted, that's fine. But yeah, that was a good night.
Yeah.
Anytime you get free games as a tip for doing something, I got no problem with that.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Before we sign off, anyone out there in the chat have anything they want to ask or just comment on? As I see, we've got several people here. Yeah, Chibi Fighters.
Thank you so much, everyone, for hanging out with us tonight.
Yeah,
it's been
absolutely.
fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of familiar faces out there, and I'm just glad y'all could stop in. So, but let's give a minute to see if anyone has anything else to add, and if not, we'll go ahead and sign off, I think.
What are your burning NES questions?
Yes. Oh, we got a couple already.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Your favorite obscure NES game?
Favorite mediocre game you shouldn't love but do. That's good too.
And who's
That's
the
a
best
good question.
developer? Best NES developer. Let's
Man.
see.
Mm.
Anyone want to toss out a favorite obscure game? I'm not even sure what is obscure anymore, considering how the internet's blowing things up.
Worm.
Worm.
Yeah,
Worm? Okay.
Whatever
Yeah.
it was. I
Play
still
that-
haven't
play that
actually
one pretty
played
recently.
that one. I can tell you both a favorite obscure and mediocre one. I'm quite a fan of Zombie Nation personally. I know that's not a
Nice.
great shoot 'em up, but it is a really bonkers one, if nothing else.
Definitely.
That is true.
Yeah, that's definitely one that you like to pull out for the WTF factor.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. Someone was asleep at the wheel on that one.
Yeah. I'm just gonna throw out Freedom Force just because that game screams 80s, and you never hear about it.
Best developer on the NES overall,
Konami,
other than Nintendo, I guess.
Konami.
Mm.
I'm going to pull out a somewhat lesser known one as an answer for that and say Sunsoft.
That's solely valid. I do
Yeah, it
like
is.
Sunsoft a lot.
I mean, they do have a few, I would say, misses, but
Two of arguably their best games never made it to North America.
that is true too.
that's another point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although they'll be released soon, at least Gimmick will be.
Right.
And
Yes. Yeah, I would also say Konami, I feel, is the best developer, but Capcom's a very close second.
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean Konami was pretty consistently good.
yeah.
Yep. For
Eh,
the most part.
Now VGM,
But yeah,
VGM has
Yeah,
to
I
go
would-
to
I would-
work. So sorry to interrupt you, Jim.
no, I'm sorry.
I say
Yeah, I was just gonna say that Konami, I would say probably gets the top spot, but I didn't want to leave Sunsoft unmentioned.
with good reason. VGM has to go to work. I hope they're still here. But wants to know what games do you prefer, the Famicom version over the NES?
Mad City over Bayou Billy.
Oh, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah,
great
that
answer.
there's a
Yeah.
good pick.
Totally agreed there. I want to say the Famicom Ninja Ryukenden 3, although over the Ninja Gaiden 3 Triga, which was made a lot brutally harder for some reason. It's the same thing that happened with Streets of Rage 3 also. Although the Famicom Ninja Ryukenden 3 is almost too easy. Whereas, of course, the Ninja Gaiden 3 that we got doubles at all the damage Ryu takes
Yeah.
and gives him limited continues for some stupid reason.
Mhm.
There's a game somewhere in the middle there, right? The best version of that game would be somewhere in the middle of
Yeah.
those two
Yes.
difficulty.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. I do still like Ninja Gaiden 3 a lot, but it is a slightly diminishing return compared to the first two. Just slightly.
I'm also going to say Castlevania 3, if for no other reason than the soundtrack of the Famicom version.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. No question.
Yeah, Omega Ace just mentioned that, and yeah, I would agree. I mean, I love, and that's probably mostly nostalgia speaking, the NES soundtrack, but yeah, Castlevania 3 with that expansion audio is truly epic.
It is. And let's see what else we got here. Favorite mediocre game that you shouldn't love but do.
Totally rad.
Hey, that's one I grew up
That's,
on.
Totally rad.
an excellent choice.
That's a very good answer. I can't disagree with it.
Good answer. Good answer.
Yeah, well, he's like Family Feud. I already
Ding, ding.
said. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was trying to make the Family Feud noise.
Now, if we want to do Family Feud upright, we got to do like, and survey says.
I already said Zombie Nation, but there's another one I could name. I don't know why I played this one as much as I did because it's more of a party game, not usually a single player one. I would occasionally play it with my brother though, but for the most part, I just play it as it is. That's Anticipation. If anyone
Figured that's where
remembers.
you were going.
Ah, yes. It's not a bad little game. It's an interesting, okay enough premise, but why I played it so much as single player, I really have no idea. But it was at least better than the NES Pictionary game, which is just all kinds of weird. Great soundtrack though.
Yeah, I was gonna say the Tim Fallon soundtrack is the best part of Pictionary.
Yeah.
That's the Fallen curse at large. 90% of the games he works on are not great, and the
Right.
soundtrack is absolutely the best part of them. Although I do actually really like Solstice, if you can believe it, but that's immaterial.
But
I'm terrible at it, but I like Solstice too.
Oh yeah, it's really hard.
speaking of really good soundtracks but mediocre games, I gotta choose one that is just. I'm mainly choosing because of the soundtrack and just because it is so out there. Because there's not any other game like it on Nintendo. In fact, it barely qualifies as a game.
Taboo: The Sixth Sense.
Bingo.
Yep.
Oh my god.
It's hard
I
to
was
steal
thinking
your
thinking
email
that one
thunder,
too.
but that's a really good answer too.
All right, mine is going to be a little bit out there, and I'm going to say Juoki, which is the Famicom version of Altered Beast,
Jeez.
which
Oh.
lots of people probably don't even know is a thing. But I like it more than the actual Altered Beast. So
It is so different from any other port or even the original game.
yeah, it's a weird game.
Now, would you also
It's got 2 extra levels and different beast forms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
would you also
I
qualify
watched your
that?
stream of it, and been meaning to pick that up at some point.
Would you also qualify that as the best hidden gem for the NES for Famicom?
I don't know if I'd call it a gem.
A cubic zirconium at best.
But yeah, what was the question? Best hidden gem?
Yeah.
Yeah, best hidden gem for NES Famicom. I don't know as if I'd say best, but one that comes to mind for me is Conquest of the Crystal Palace.
That's a good one.
Oh, well, that reminds me then of my answer. I don't know how hidden it is anymore, but Jackie Chan's Action Kung Fu.
That one's great
Another
too.
good one, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I almost hesitate to use the term hidden gem nowadays because I think when that term broke open and these games didn't become so hidden anymore, now they fetch like 4 figures
True.
on freaking eBay.
True.
And I want to say that, so calling something a hidden gem is relatively nominal, but if this were 15 or so years ago and the aftermarket had been totally blown up, I would say Little Samson.
Mm.
I would actually go for a little bit different, mainly because I saw this game for 50 cents in a Goodwill, and now I don't know what the price is on it now, but if I knew then what I know now, I would have grabbed that copy. I would say Vice Project Doom.
Oh yeah.
That's a great one too.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
Yes.
That's a good one.
Mhm.
That one, I mean, that was a Nintendo Power. It was on the freaking cover of Nintendo Power, which is why I have it. It's one of my childhood games. I still have it CIB. I loved the heck out of that game when I was a kid.
It still holds up. I really like it.
There's a couple of cover games that never really made an impact till later on, like Metal Storm was another good one.
Mhm.
Oh, I love that one too. Wasn't Power Blade on cover once also?
I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Omega Ace Gaming mentioned the Japanese version of Shatterhand. I would say
yeah.
just Shatterhand itself is a nice, game.
Oh, yeah.
But
The differences
what was the
minimal.
name of the? It was something like
Soul
Tokyo-
Brain? Tokyo something
Yeah.
something Soul
Yeah,
Brain.
yeah.
Tokyo Surai Soul Brain, something like that.
It was based off of like some sort of like Super Sentai slash like
Yeah, it was a
show.
live action. Yeah, kind of Sentai. inspired thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like some like futuristic police force.
Yeah.
Oh, there was one that I just had in mind a minute ago. That was, I want to say it was a Japanese game. Oh, yeah, it was. Spartan X2.
Yes.
Oh, I've
Mhm.
heard good things about that one. I haven't played that.
It's
Yep.
short,
Yeah.
but it's fun.
Sequel to Kung Fu, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I think it's a better sequel than the arcade game Vigilante, which I think is kind of too hard for its own good.
Yeah, I want to like Vigilante, but I
Yeah,
just
there you
have
go.
the damnedest
Tokyo
time.
Shirai Soul Brain. No, it was something like that. Or Tokyo.
How my sister just asked about Athena. That game is kind of garbage.
Kinda.
Yeah.
I have a soft spot for it, though.
Yeah.
There are so many games that I want to like. Athena, I want to like.
Exactly.
It's really bad.
Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm.
The original arcade version isn't even all that great shakes either, but my Chronics just made it even poorer.
Yeah.
The L85 Spelunker 2 actually seemed pretty cool.
Oh, yeah.
I picked it up last year on Famicom and played a little bit of it. It seems really interesting. Like it seemed very ambitious. Certainly more ambitious than Spelunker.
I actually played that
Definitely.
game, and I want to say I actually did beat it also. My memory on it, however, is fuzzy. I just remember that, like, you're actually go to literal hell and are speaking with the devil whenever you
Oh,
die.
jeez.
Yeah.
Which was probably a reason why we didn't get it in the West. But I remember it was pretty fun. Pretty obtuse, though. But yeah, my memories are fuzzy.
Sharon mentioned Spot, and I would
Hey!
put that on my list of mediocre games that I enjoy.
I'd say if you like
The
Othello,
puzzle, the
it's something
puzzle
good.
one.
Yeah, I assume that's what
I think
what you meant
I think that's the only Spot game that came out for the
for
the NES.
NES anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I grew up upon also, and it is kind of a modified version of Othello. It's really based more. It was more or less a licensed port of a sort of Othello variation that I believe was originally named Infection. It's also known as Attacks, and it got a really creepy arcade version with these bizarre, haunting-looking Geiger aliens. But yeah,
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
no.
I've seen that version. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty creepy. But
Mhm.
yeah, I like Spot. The animations were cute, if nothing else.
Right. Right.
I remember back in the early days of my owning NES when I was initially doing a lot of renting. One game I remember renting and actually playing through to completion, which, if I remember correctly, Eugene streamed not too terribly long ago. It was Breakthrough.
Oh yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was. I finished it that night. I've never played it since. I mean, I played it since, but I never finished it since. Pardon me.
Hmm.
In fact, I own a copy. So it was. I never saw the arcade game in person. I, played it in MAME and whatnot, but it's been very forgotten. Extremely
It's
forgotten.
not too bad. And it wasn't too hard. I managed to finish that one on stream
Yeah,
in a couple hours. So
I think I had to bow out before that happened, but
Hmm.
well,
Another one that I mean I don't know how much or how hidden it is, but Crystalis is one of my favorite childhood games.
here's Crystals. That brings me to a question here. Out of all the Zelda-like games on the NES, specifically in that vein, like the original Zelda, if you had to choose between that, Crystalis, and Willow, which one would you pick?
As much as I genuinely like Crystalis, I think I'm going to have to go with the boring answer and hit the original Legend of Zelda. Because it's still a very well-famed game nowadays for a reason. It's more free-form and secret exploring approach is really good. As much as I like Crystalis, I do have to dock the game points for forcing grinding at several points. Because if you're not a certain level whenever you face a boss in the game, you cannot harm them. They are invincible and you have no choice to lose. And the game doesn't even tell you how strong you have to be to even dent the boss, so I think that's genuinely poor game design in that case. I still like the game a lot aside from that, but that is kind of a kick in the nuts, so I have to say Zelda's the better game. It is what it is.
Oh man, I haven't finished Crystalis yet. I keep
Oh.
meaning to play it. That I think is one of the games that I did borrow as a kid, and I think I only had it for like a weekend, so I didn't get very far in it. But I think I might go with Crystalis because I love the science fiction motif of it. You know, it seemed really cool instead of like sort of more traditional like swords and sorcery kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm actually going to give the nod to Crystalis too, and actually considered that. Earlier when we were talking about hot takes, is that I don't know as if I'm much a fan of the original Legend of Zelda and Metroid. I feel, there was a question too as far as overrated games. I was never really part of kind of the culture, I guess, that I've heard people talk about that arose around Legend of Zelda, where it was like the playground talk of oh, I found this, and just kind of the communal solving of the game. I never really experienced that. I didn't own the game. I rented it a few times and was mostly confused by it, and just didn't care a whole lot for it. I mean, I appreciate the game a lot more now, but yeah, as a kid, I wasn't a huge fan of The Legend of Zelda. And, the same thing with Metroid, just kind of the cryptic exploration. I didn't enjoy a whole lot. So, for that reason, I think Crystalis would be my pick, too.
Well, let's see.
I feel as if I chose the boring answer, and I'm usually the maverick in these things, so I don't know how that worked, but I still really like Crystalis. It's just that one element about the levels has come to bug me.
I do agree. I do agree with that point.
Gotcha.
Well, if I had to pick between those three, I would say Eastbook 1 and 2 for the TurboGrafx 16.
That's a cheat.
Hey,
wait a minute.
It's not allowed.
It's on the Famicom as well. So I don't know
Okay,
why you had
all right, fine. I picked Galvelius for the Sega Master System.
Okay.
Seriously,
I need
though,
to try that one.
that's a great game. Serious answer, though, I'm actually going to pick Willow.
Very good answer. That's one I actually haven't
Willow is really
played
good.
very much, and I feel like I really should have played it more by now. That's something I have to amend someday.
I still need to finish that one.
Yeah, don't you have that long-running...
It's a very slow running recurring stream. I should probably get back to it.
And we got another question from BL85 here. Apparently thinks we're some kind of spin-off of the Angry Video Game Nerd. What are our thoughts on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
Oddly specific. Haven't played it too much, but yeah, it's really obtuse, and I don't really get it. It seems like a bit of an interesting concept reading up on it, but in actual practice, I really have no idea what exactly I'm doing, so... Yeah, it doesn't seem so much outright super terrible, just as it does painfully obtuse, but... Yeah, I think Jekyll could at least stand to move genuinely faster. That seems like something a ROM hack should fix. So, other than that, I don't know what to tell you.
The Famicom version is supposedly better.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, they made some. They like dropped a couple of levels, for the US version apparently, and in one of them they like changed the level design, but they didn't change the enemy behavior, so the enemies are still spawning the way they would in the original level, which isn't great. That's another one that I played a little bit of as a kid because I borrowed it, but again, I didn't understand how to play it either, and I actually picked up a cartridge of it a few years ago, because I have this sort of goal of finishing games that completely baffled me as a kid that I could never get through. So I've slowly been working on that. So I have to get to that one at some point. And I wanted to pick it up before it went even higher in price because people are buying it because AVGN hates it.
Mm-hmm. That's the YouTuber inflation effect. I don't want to be mad for content creators doing their job, but occasionally I do get kind of spiteful when they really talk something up, and then, oh, what do you know? It's $500 freaking now. I know that's not fair. It just annoys me.
Well, let's see.
I've actually not played enough of Jekyll and Hyde to have much of an opinion on it.
Huh. I owned a card at one point, but honestly, as far as NES games based on classic literature, The Great Gatsby is way better.
Yep.
What about
Also,
the Adventures of Jane Austen?
Yeah, I was about to say, that's forthcoming.
That's right.
Right?
Oh, cool.
You guys didn't notice, but when Mike was actively streaming, there was a running gag where every time he'd ask for a new recommendation, my first one was always The Great Gatsby.
Nice.
Didn't matter
It's a
what
fun
stream
little-
he was playing.
It is a good game.
It is a fun little game, yeah. I actually do kind of wish it was longer, but for what is essentially a gag, it's better than it has any right to be, especially considering I'm personally not a fan of the original book on which it's based, which I know is a hot take because it's a classic of American literature and whatnot, but...
Yeah, you're not alone.
Hey,
Cool. Thank you for your support, dude.
if I had known there was a giant flying pair of glasses that shoots lasers in that book, I'd have read it a long time ago.
It would have been better with that, I have to agree.
I bought the T-shirt for that game.
T-shirt, yeah.
Nice. Oh,
I mean,
boy.
the story it tells is all right. I just do not like Fitzgerald's writing style. I thought it was kind of haughty, if that's the right word to use in that case. But this isn't classic literature roundtable, so I'll shut up.
He should have written it more like the script writers for Ninja Gaiden.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway.
Oh, boy. Sharon, for some reason, brought up the Goonies, Ghostbusters, and Gremlins.
The 3G licensed G's.
Goonies was good. Gremlins
Two
was
of those
good.
games are good.
Gremlins 2 is really good.
Yeah.
It is, yes.
The only Ghostbusters game that's any good is
Ghostbusters.
New Ghostbusters 2. For the
Yeah, which was a PAL release.
Yep, and on the Famicom too.
Right.
So,
Real shame we didn't get that one in the West. The one we had to settle for was by Imagineering.
yeah, thanks Activision.
And then, of course,
for-
that's nothing to say about the first Ghostbusters game, which is touted as one of the worst games for the system and certainly not undeserved.
Ghostbusters.
Yep, that's the one. Prove the justice of our culture, etc. But the Sega Master System version of that game is actually surprisingly quality.
That's what I've heard too. Is that the NES is a really bad port.
Yeah,
There's
the SMS version isn't perfect, but I think it's worth a check.
There's a good reason for that too. Compile did it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bill and Ted, Eugene, really? Why did
Totally
they reissue
bogus.
that?
Well, Expert74 says the bigger issue with older games being expensive is not YouTubers covering it, but rather the game industry in general not doing enough to make their game catalogs readily available. I'm just pointing out, Bill and Ted is back. So,
Bill and
Why
Ted-
did they choose that one?
That could have
Why is
stayed
Little
buried.
Space
I
not
think they
on the
were.
Switch?
I think they had to do it as part of some other deal. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me.
That's wow. Either
Yeah,
that or
I enjoyed the Three Stooges, Sharon. Not enough to keep playing it to get the good ending, but enough to play through it to get an ending. It definitely was better than I was expecting it to be.
I enjoy the
I'd
fights
also-
in that.
I'd also like to pick the Three Stooges for a mediocre game that I kind of like for some reason.
Yeah, that's a good. That's a good choice too.
I
It
admit it.
has charm.
And I love that opening that they do.
oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
that's
You give
great.
What? Hey, fellas, you're in the wrong game.
Hey, this was a kid's game. You imbeciles.
Ow!
Stooges are universal.
One of the less bad ports by Beam Software.
Admittedly, yes. I remember way back when actually buying a copy of Defender of the Crown and not having any idea what to do. It was just like, okay, I know this is supposed to be something special, but what am I doing? All right.
Oh, here's a game none of us have mentioned yet.
All right.
Silent Service.
Oh.
That's a game that everyone owns, right? I always see that
Right,
in people's NES collections. I did not own one until I picked one up recently.
Which baffles me. It's like, how could this game have been that popular to have that many copies of it just around?
Yeah, apparently there was a whole warehouse of them that was unsold.
Wow.
Yeah, it did not do good.
It seems like an okay game, but you have to like study how to play it. It has like a really thick manual, and it's so complicated that
Well, it's a microprose game, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Think so.
And those are kind of known for being quite involved.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I think it would be perfect. It would have been the perfect game for me when I was a kid, between Christmas and my birthday. Like, if I had only one game for 6 months, that's probably a good one to have because I would probably take the time to learn it because I would have nothing else to play.
I have to say, the first time I ever played that game was at my older brother's place. I have an older brother, too. Two of his biggest things are football and submarines. He's built them for a living, for crying out loud. And my family has a bit of a naval history to him. I mean, my dad was on the USS Hardhead back in the 50s. My uncle I was named after was a sub chaser in the North Atlantic during World War II. But so naturally, the games he had were Tecmo Bowl and Silent Service. And I remember playing and going, wow, this is complex. So I ended up buying my own copy at one point, and it was just like, I don't think I like this.
You should have opted for Scoon instead.
Now that I have a copy of. Except it's the Famicom version, not the NES one, because that's stupidly expensive.
It is, yes.
Even back then, it was expensive.
I will say I at least really like Tecmo Super Bowl. That's kind of like the football game for people who aren't football fans. But sports in general are really not my dig, and thus I don't like most sports games. But there are a few good ones. Blades of Steel is great.
Blades of
if
Steel,
it has Kunio-kun in it, I like it.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, that's a good metric.
Yeah, I remember Gambari Dunk Heroes in particular being a fun one. 3 baskets. That's like I want to see in sports to really spice them up.
And you can pick up one of your opponents and dunk them through all 3.
Yep. As is Kunio's penchant for violence.
Right.
But don't mince words, Mike. Tell us what you really think of sports.
Yeah.
On second thought, don't. We're trying to keep this relatively family friendly.
I made a very angry post on Rob's board, The Third Moon, lately, and I don't know, I just wasn't having a great day, so I just vented about it, and I was hearing, oh hey, Eagles versus Giants, and blow off. I will never make as much money as these bastards, and I don't want to hear it, so... I have a very stereotypical nerd hates jock opinion on sports that isn't really in the, I think, spirit of this roundtable, but
it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
I will say, the first con I ever went to, I got to meet the entire cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Yes,
it was a mixed bag. I basically just exchanged greetings with Patrick Stewart because of the jerks at the con. Long story that. But they were essentially, unless you had something to sign, they weren't going to let you in line to meet him. So they threw me and my friend out of line as we're being told to leave. We're walking away, and I just waved at Patrick Stewart, guys, said, love your work. And he's just like, thank you. At that point, the guy getting us out of line comes. He's like, you pull somebody in, you're getting ejected. And it's like, fuck off.
Jeez.
Anyway, but I did get to
Jeez.
talk to Will Wheaton for a little bit. And
Oh,
Will
nice.
Wheaton?
yes, and get this, I totally blew his mind. I didn't do any of that typical, like, shut up, Wesley, or yes, I know he hates that. But
Mhm.
I remember reading an interview he'd given to a game magazine in the late 80s, where he said Gradius was his favorite NES game. And I said to my friend Bob, I'm going to, like, totally blow his mind with this. Walk up, and I mentioned that to him, and the look on his face at that point was just like, who is this crazy man asking me questions about an interview I don't even remember giving? But he recovered.
Was that you outside my window last night?
But the funny thing was, he actually recovered pretty quickly. He's like, oh, maybe at the time it was, but nowadays, whenever I play Nintendo, I play like Zelda and RC Pro-Am. I was like, good choices. And he's like, oh,
Yep.
and Blades of Steel, greatest hockey game ever made. And that's my favorite sports game of all time. So I remember leaving and going, I got to talk NES Will Wheaton.
Maybe this is contentious. Maybe it's nostalgia, but I prefer ice hockey.
You know, I tried getting into that, and it didn't click with me.
I prefer Blades, but Nintendo's ice hockey is pretty good. I do like the 3 different body types that you could select for. You can have an entire team of fat guys if you want, which I think that's what I usually did. But
Right.
yeah.
But no, I agree with what Omega Ace Gaming said. The less accurate the sports game, the more I'll enjoy it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Base Wars was a fun
Oh,
one.
yeah.
That.
Yep.
TNC Surf Design.
Oh, that's DNC Surf Design. That's another mediocre game I have fond memories of. There's not much to it. There's really only like 2 games, and they're both simple as get out.
Surfing and skating.
Yeah, exactly. But
Mhm.
yeah, I had fun with it as a kid. LJN has published far worse things in it, so
Oh,
yeah.
how about California Games or its lesser known companion, World Games?
Yeah, California Games is another one I grew up on, and I do like it quite a bit. A pretty quality port by Rare. World Games I didn't grow up on. It doesn't feel quite as polished. I think it came before it, but
But it's got caber tossing.
yes, yes. The only game I can think of that actually has that bizarre Scottish pastime in it. But yeah, it's all right for what it is. There's also Winter Games, which is one of the worst NES games ever. So.
Yeah. And then there's stuff
Um,
like Skate or Die and 720 Degrees and whatnot.
I don't like those games where you have to
Exactly.
just mash buttons fast to
Yeah.
run or whatever.
Track and Field,
Snoopy's Silly Sports Spectacular.
a.k.a. Donald Duck.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I know Rob's not a big fan of Double Dribble, but that's one I grew up playing, and I liked it quite a bit. So.
But, you know, there's actually one I discovered was really fun. It's Famicom exclusive. It was the Tecmo Sumo Wrestling game.
Oh yeah.
I forget the title, but it's
Supari something or other. I don't remember
Supario
exactly.
Zumo, I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
But I actually got a hold of that on a whim and just actually sunk some time into it.
Cool. Yeah, there's a sumo game on the Super Famicom I remember getting quite a bit into, but I cannot remember its name at all. I'll let you know if I remember what that was, though.
Tecmo also released a sequel to the Famicom game on the Super Famicom, which included for the first time a lady sumo wrestler, who is your
Cool.
stereotypical anime blonde-haired chick wearing like a tire around her waist.
Okay.
Okay, that sounds pretty great.
Yeah, the interesting thing, I don't know how I pulled it off one night, but I'm playing the game and I beat her. And I must have done some kind of button combination or something, but she lost her top. And of course, she covered herself up real quick and got really embarrassed. But for a brief second, you could see bare pixels.
Wow.
Scandalous.
Extremely. And for some reason, Sharon wants us to talk about Back to the Future again, but I think we already covered that.
Yeah, I don't know what more blood we can squeeze out of this stone. I'll just say that the first Force mini game that you need to do, the one where you have to like throw the milkshakes at the punks or whatever, is really, really terrible, and that should have been a bonus stage and not a mandatory freaking thing you had to beat to progress in the game.
Those bonus levels are so those mini games are so hard. I cannot do the one in the high school very well with the hearts.
I mean, yeah, the main game is bad enough, but these are just terrible.
I also say, like, I kind of hate that you only have one shot at the end of the game.
Yeah.
But I will say that it is also kind of clever in that, like, it really raises the stakes, right? Like, Marty had the one shot to get Back to the Future, and so in that sense, like, replicating that experience, but it's very unforgiving, like as an actual game mechanic.
You know, I took that game and traded it to the first person who wanted it. It was a girl I knew in high school, and I traded it for a copy of Robo Warrior.
Yeah, that's a better game. Not a perfect one, but another childhood favorite of mine.
I couldn't do jack in it, but I had more fun with than I did with Back to the Future. I can tell you that.
I think I would too.
Yeah, but had a good soundtrack too. Come to think of it.
Yeah. Pretty sure it's the same team that worked on it as Hector 87. Like the first stage music in both of them is almost the exact same.
Pretty much. Anyway, unless anyone else has got any questions, I think we've pretty much covered everything we can cover tonight.
And we pretty much closed the book on the NES. There's nothing else that could ever be said about the console or the games.
Not a thing.
What's going on?
Not a thing.
We've got the last word.
Yeah, not even Contra Force? I guess we could talk about that one.
You know, when I got that game,
deep on that one.
When I got that game originally, I got it used complete from Blockbuster for $11.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
I later bought it back after. There was an incident in my life I have a tendency to refer to as the Great Crash, where I lost my entire original collection. I did get some of it back, like the actual games I owned, but my current collection is much better than the original one. But I've rebought Contra Force for $60 at that point.
Jesus.
And then I went and sold it. Because
I'm upset about passing on it for $75 when I had an opportunity a few years back.
I hope he sold it for $60 also.
I actually sold it for more than that.
Good. Very good.
And then I went and looked up the prices the other day just for the heck of it. Loose copies are like $150 now.
Of course.
Yeah.
Join us for the next roundtable called F the Aftermarket.
Yeah, pretty much.
Too true.
I'm sure there's plenty else we could talk about regarding the NES. Like, what's your favorite controller? Or favorite light gun game? Or most hated enemy character? Or how much we all love ice levels?
Yes.
Ice levels versus water levels. Seems to be a constant debate.
Mm-hmm.
Both are terrible. This is true.
Yes. And or unlicensed games, or licensed games that never made it out over here but only made it out in Europe, stuff like that.
Hammer and Harry.
Hammer and Harry. Well, that was from Japan too. I'm thinking of more stuff like Noah's Ark.
Oh, okay. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, those unlicensed games. Okay.
Yeah,
I was just thinking of like power releases that we didn't get.
Yeah, exactly. Except that they had to also not come out in Japan too.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, on a side note, I have played through the original Probotector, which is super easy if you are good at Contra. Because it's the same damn game.
Yeah, I would imagine it would just be the same.
Exactly.
NES Roundtable 2, Rob Boogaloo.
Yeah, that wouldn't be fair to everybody else.
Yeah, what about Mike?
Yeah.
Or are we talking about Rob the Robot?
Oh no.
We probably shouldn't talk about Rob the Robot. That was just a gimmick designed to get the thing into stores.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. But yeah, plenty left to talk about, but we're not going to stay here all night and do that.
I
So,
am admittedly running low on energy at this point.
yeah, and this is about the time I usually start getting ready for bed. So, anyway, thanks to everyone who showed up, and
Yeah,
we
thank
do
you.
appreciate you being here. If anyone
Very
who
much.
hasn't yet has not, if anyone who has not checked out Jim's or Eugene's streams, there are links in the description along with for Mike's Twitch channel. And obviously, you know how to find me. So, speaking of Eugene's streams, what's next on NES Alphanumeric, Eugene?
It is Laser Invasion. Is Zapper game.
Oh, yeah. The one they had that weird-looking headset for.
I will not be using that. I don't own it. I've seen the Metal Beast. He's another streamer, or he was a streamer. I saw him play through it with the headset. It looked painful. I'm just going to use a zapper.
Yeah, probably a good idea.
Good
Actually, that might be a good stream to play some more Willow of when I can no longer handle the eye strain and zapper strain and everything. So maybe I'll continue my slow Willow playthrough.
Oh, there you go. How about you, Jim? Got any plans for streaming in the near future?
Yeah, I might be able to pull something off this weekend yet. So, I guess look at.
Another Data East game.
No, I don't think so. I think I'm actually leaning towards a Burai Fighter for this
Oh,
next
nice.
stream.
Hey,
Yeah.
that's pretty good.
So, yep. But yeah, so hopefully tomorrow night, if everything works out as planned. But yeah, other than that, I have a few other NES games lined up for the future, and I'll just have to decide what order I want to tackle them in.
Cool. Mike, do you plan to come off out of your hiatus anytime soon?
That I'm not sure about. I'm actually focusing more of my energies on writing a big rambling book about various subjects, but has some video game content in it. I don't know if I should give it more focus, but I'm just writing it however I'm flowing it. Tentative title is The Whole Package, derisive sort of riff on me being very much not that, at least in my own, self-deprecating worldview. But I'm up to 9 chapters and like 30,000 words, so this might actually be something in the future. I just wish I knew the best. I just wish I knew the business side of things to get it out somewhere. But yeah. So I am doing something creative that is vaguely game related. As for streaming, I still haven't felt it, but never say never.
Well, speaking of which, as anyone who may have heard, I'm getting away from more of the gaming streams, although I still have a couple playing with Bette. And I definitely want to do more roundtables, which could very well have a revolving group of people. So there are always those, Mike, if you're up for those.
Yeah, if there's any that interest and or I think I can contribute a good deal to, I'd love to be on them. So
Yeah, and but I can definitely think of a couple more coming up well, there's one that I'm waiting specifically for a certain time because of who's going to be involved in it and what's being unveiled at the time. But I'm not going to say anything else about that right now. So let's just say it's Splatterhouse related, though.
Bit of a teaser there.
Mm-hmm. I will say this, though, in case anyone gets their hopes up, it has nothing to do with a new game. Much as we all wish it did.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's a shame.
Yeah. Namco. Anyway. So, all right. Well, thank you.
I guess calling it a new game's a bit of a misnomer. It's 13 years old now.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
sorry, you're closing the stream, so I'll shut up.
Yeah, well, thanks to all three of you for joining me here tonight to just talk about the NES.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was fun.
Yep. And so we'll be popping up each other's streams at some point or other, of course. So, with that, again, thanks to everyone who showed up, and you all have a good night.
Yeah, and a good weekend. Take care.
Yep.
Good night, everyone.
Goodbye.